things I told myself not to.
Yeah.
I don't know why
The hell with
Craig
the
doesn't have
consequences.
video.
Audio check. I guess it helps to enable the audio
check,
so
check,
that
check,
everybody
check,
can hear us.
I see that Craig doesn't have video.
No.
I think Craig
No.
should have like an avatar that's mouth is moving as it's hearing voices.
There
I turn
is an
off
avatar,
I-
but it just
I hide.
it sits there and does nothing, so I disable it.
Oh, that's a
Yeah, I
bummer.
just turn it off too.
So, am I hosting?
I mean, I haven't done one. I don't care, but yeah. Looking at the chart here, I think my last one was 3 months ago.
Yeah, mine was a while ago as
Me.
well.
Where did Moss say for sure he wasn't going to be here, or
Yeah, he
Yep.
he was. He said he was too.
Anxious.
Yeah,
So-
the changes were a little. He needs some time to adjust.
where did he say that? I didn't get. I guess I
Various
haven't been paying
That's what I
attention.
thought he said yesterday. I mean, I
No,
could
it's
be
various
wrong, but I was pretty
conversations.
sure. Yeah.
Well, I thought he sat
Too
there
much
and-
exchanging, too quick for him.
Yeah. It's okay. He'll be all right.
Yeah, it's all right.
If we do one or two and he sees what it's all about, I think he'll be fine.
I
Like
think
we
if
said,
the
I think
notes
he
were
underestimates his.
Yeah. Oh, he'll.
Yeah, the show keeps changing, so it's just changing a lot right this second. Give him some time to come around.
Changes. Yeah.
Change
It's all
is inevitable, except from vending machines.
Well, he did come up with the idea to take the round table and change the name of it and create another. You know, he had some ideas around that. Nobody responded to him. I should have said something.
No,
we did.
I
We did.
responded.
We
I
talked
thought it was a
about
good idea.
Oh,
We all thought it was
Hey.
a good idea, but we mentioned that we also needed to talk to you specifically, Bill, because you're the one that posts stuff.
right. My only concern with that is that I want to make sure it continues to be available for the community to join in. I think that's
Absolutely.
unique. I think no other show does that I'm aware
Yeah.
of, except maybe.
Hold on, somebody just said something. Was it Londoner in Discord?
Well,
I
I
can't hear
had a
any
question.
audio on YouTube. I could. Just a second.
Oh, I
Bill.
just
Check
fixed it.
again.
I just turned it on.
So, who's in mintCast public? Someone named Stanner or Dan R. Wonder what they're doing in there.
He's just playing around. We never do the regular show. Yeah, he said it's okay now. Yeah, there's a delay. I looked at OBS Studio and saw that both desktop audio and the mic was muted still. I have to
Run a
go
real-time
back.
Kernel.
Do what?
You got to run a real-time kernel so you don't have any delay. I'm sorry, I'm being a jerk.
Well, actually, when you're streaming on YouTube, you've got 3 settings you can use. You've got like a very
You're going to
little.
regret having started this, Eric.
You've got low latency, middle latency, and
Yeah.
and I imagine
Is this the bit where you say, I run Arch, by the way, so I can do this all the time?
Yeah, I was just going to.
Now I
mention,
can
is
understand
this an
a little.
archism?
I can understand a little giving me a little crap about technical stuff on my other show, but these are technical people.
Listen, we love picking on you, okay? So if it wasn't Arch, we would just find something else. So
I've got art
And we
stuff
pick-
going on too.
We pick on everybody if they tell us they run
I
our
was telling my wife that
It's-
today.
a requirement.
I was saying,
it's
you
like
know,
a kick me sign.
for especially like working class people, if you're not, I don't trust people that don't give each other a little bit of crap, because
Oh, yeah. I mean,
if I'm not giving you a
don't-
little crap, that means I don't want to talk to you. So
yeah, right? I mean, that's pretty much a sign that you're not well
Right.
liked if people aren't messing with you. Unless you are one of those people that like freaks out over the smallest things and you're like, "Oh, sorry, man. Just playing around."
and I am
Yeah,
very
that's my wife.
appreciative when people show me that characteristic early on. That way I know not to talk to them.
Yeah, I wish I'd figured that out
Thank
with
you.
my
You
wife
just
as
say
well.
yeah.
Yeah. Saved me a lot of heartache. Okay. We ought to get her rolling here. Is everybody comfortable with the layout, and does anybody have anything they're unsure about, or
You mean that in notes?
yeah, well, I mean, are you unsure about how this is going to flow? I know we're going to screw it up, but
No, we're not.
I think
It's
it's
gonna be
fine.
brilliant. What are you on
I
about?
changed. So I just unilaterally decided to check this out above the vibrations from the ether,
Yeah. Good idea.
just because it felt weird to have. I think vibrations kind of makes more sense at the end, but
No, I
Well,
agree.
you need
So,
to change
anyway.
the template as well if you're going to do that.
yeah, I know. It did occur to me after the fact. I just wanted to make sure you guys were cool with it before I started doing that. So.
Yeah, stuff
Yeah,
like
so
Oh,
that.
look, I'm in here 3 times.
We're professional amateurs.
We did get
That's right.
another vibration. Let me see.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, we got a second one.
I'm thinking
Cool, get
about
that in there.
But we got it today, so we technically could put it in next show.
I'm thinking
Oh.
about
Like the
turning off.
vibration you touch.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, I was just being snarky, saying, is this like the vibration you get from like a 110 outlet or from like a 12-volt battery?
Man, them
It's
110s.
more like
It's a,
those joy buzzers.
It's a 50 hertz vibration.
Yeah. Oh.
Okay,
Okay.
This conversation could go south very, very quickly.
Yeah, it could. In
I
fact, I
want-
thought we were
I want-
already there.
Oh, I was in the conversation, so we were already there.
I'm thinking about turning
Oh.
off the comments on the website because it takes me forever to notice they're there, and I don't think anybody else.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, because there was something for distro hoppers, and we didn't see it for like 3 months.
Yeah,
Like, oops.
and there's ways. I mean, I get emails notifying sometimes, but they look just like the emails telling me about something WordPress is doing or whatever, and so sometimes they get overlooked. So we've got plenty of ways to get in touch. So I'm thinking about turning that off.
Email.
Anyway, so shall we get this started?
Well, you gonna do it, Majid, or
Yeah, I'll do it.
Let's
I'll
do a
do it,
3,
I'll do
2, 1 first, though.
Okay.
Because 3, 2, 1.
Zero. Oh.
Yeah, the 0 is silent. It's a silent 0, like most zeros.
Sorry,
out there.
habits.
It's implied.
It's an
I've been
implied
doing this a
zero.
long time.
Really?
Like
Really?
step
I
back,
didn't know that, Bill. None of us knew that at all.
It's an implied 0.
Is it really?
Which number
Okay.
did they skip in the
It's a rhetorical
launch
zero.
countdowns?
In the what, Eric?
In the launch countdowns, because they go like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. There's like 5. One of them they don't say because I think it sounds like another
Oh, I
number
don't
or
know
something.
that.
Oh, 5. They don't say 5 because it sounds like fire. I think that's what it is.
Ah.
Just in case somebody's listening for the wrong
Right.
reason.
So you go 6, 4, 3.
Okay.
It's like the holy
Well-
hand grenade of Antioch, where they're
Right.
counting down. They're like,
Thou
3,
shalt count to 3.
2. No, you skipped 3. Oh, 3. Throw it.
All right. Go ahead, Majid.
Welcome to mintCast, the podcast by the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 462. This is episode 462.5.
Negative.
I didn't think so.
Yeah.
Recorded on Sunday, June 8th, 2025.
Brokerism joke after $6,100 worth of random bills. I'm Joe.
Is it Friday yet? I'm Bill.
Energized with an S. I'm Majid.
Feeling the heat. I'm Eric.
After 12,000 miles, I'm glad to be home. I'm Dale.
Oh, such an exaggeration. You only did 11,700 something. I mean, come on, man.
Oh, so first up in the news, Mint Monthly News, May 2025. Bit of controversy around the Switch 2. Fedora 43 to remove X11. The end of Linux format. And speaking of formats, we have a new format and a new co-host.
Yeah.
Although, so the new format, you will see how it works out.
Or
The
doesn't.
new co-host is at the moment listening to it on, and so you can interact with Charles if you wish through the YouTube. We're still ironing out some audio things, so hopefully the next episode we'll have him on, giving us his very important and sensible views, unlike the views that we have, which are very, very much not sensible or important. Anyway, Wanderings. Though Wanderings no longer on this episode of the mintCast. It's now going to be moved to the Saturday Roundtable stream. So if you want to hear about what Joe's been getting up to, what I've been getting up to, what Bill's been getting up to, etc., that's where you want. So we can make it more and more interactive for everyone. As for our innards, well, Dale is back here again discussing mobile internet devices and networks.
Yay, Dale.
We've got a interesting thing, and check this out, Packet, which is a new file transfer utility, which kind of is a bit like Android's QuickShare. And we've got some feedback and a couple of suggestions. If you want to follow along with the discussions, the full show notes are listed in the show's description at mintcast.org/show-notes. So, Mint Monthly News. Eric, you were going to talk about this?
Oh, sure. So this is from May 2025. Mint 20.x has reached end of life. So upgrade options are shown in the blog, meaning upgrading from that version to a new version. Fingerprint authentication, Linux Mint 22.2 will feature a brand new app called Fingwit, which is a fingerprint configuration tool. It detects if your computer has a fingerprint reader and lets you record your fingerprints. It then configures your system to use fingerprint authentication for the login screen, screensaver, sudo commands, and admin apps like PK exec. That's pretty cool.
I must say, I've always wanted Linux to start supporting a lot of these, because a lot of the laptops we've got nowadays have got some kind of biometric thing going on, haven't they?
Yeah.
They've got fingerprint sensors, they've got cameras, infrared, doodah, whatever's.
Mhm.
And, you know, it would be cool if we could use them. I'm assuming there's some proprietary stuff to do with security, which has meant that it's taken a while, but I'm not sure if that's true.
The other thing is that the hardware behind those is usually some like weird vendor that like it's generally not supported like by default in the kernel. So like my Dell has a fingerprint reader, but it's from a company called like Goodix or something, and there's no driver. So yeah, but this is cool. So for the ones that are supported, go ahead. Sorry, Dell.
No, a little bit of a lag. My T460 that I sent to a friend, on my T560 and I don't know about my T15, but I know my T560 detects the fingerprint sensor, and I tried looking at it when I was working on the innards today, and I have Debian testing on there just to check it out, and it doesn't show an option for what one I can select, because on the other distros it shows up as an input device. And so this on Debian, on GNOME 48, I'm on testing, it doesn't show that up, so I'm hoping that it works on there, because I so want to do this, because I've had ThinkPads for decades, and I've never been able to use it.
Gotcha. Well, hopefully the Fingwit is something that's portable and you can install it on other distros or other desktops. So I guess we'll find out. But very cool that they included.
Londoner said that there is a app image.
Nice. Awesome.
Oh, that's
All
cool.
right. So also for LibadWeta apps and patches. So if you remember from last month, they were talking about taking an approach for theming where they are going to use LibadWeta and actually have things like the accent color and some of the other things work better with the Mint themes. So starting with Linux Mint 22.2, LibadWeta will be patched to work with themes. Support for LibadWeta was added to Mint Y, Mint X, and Mint L. The following apps will be upgraded to their LibadWeta versions: GNOME Calendar, Simple Scan, and Baobab, which is the file disk use application. The LibAdapta fork in the scope of XApp for our own projects, LibadWeta was forked into LibAdapta, and LibAdapta is LibadWeta with theme support and a few extras. It provides the same features and the same look as LibadWeta by default. Framework.
Okay, so why fork it like that? if it's the same features and the same look?
Because they are trying to hook into the way that GNOME has, the way that, Wayland is using libadwaita and theming. And so, in order for it to work with the way that Cinnamon, I believe, handles themes and like their X apps and stuff, in order for that to work, they had to actually like fork it and do some things to it. Maybe they'll upstream it. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Okay.
Frameworks. This is cool. The company sent Clem some of their hardware, so he was able to test the laptop 13 and the gaming desktop already. Their products are really nice. Yeah, right. Clem hopes to be able to review them soon and add them to the store section. This isn't a commercial partnership. By testing this hardware, we boost compatibility for the brand and significantly improve Linux Mint. It's thanks to Framework we've implemented power profiles in Linux Mint 22.1. It's also thanks to them that we worked on fingerprint authentication. There you go. Or pushed towards an HWE kernel in Linux Mint 22.2. Their hardware challenges us to do better because it's packed with features in need for support. That's really cool.
So, am I right that you can buy a Framework laptop with Linux on it?
Yes.
Yes. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember which distro is it? Is it Ubuntu that's on there if you ask?
I think you
for
have
it?
You got a choice.
Yeah, there's some choices.
Because wouldn't it be cool if there's a Framework 13 Mint edition? That would be cool.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah, so they have a whole page on Linux compatibility, and they have a chart of like what is officially supported, which is Fedora 42 and Bazzite.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have compatible community supported Arch and Bluefin. And so it's just a whole page of like all the distros, their support status, and like, what works, what doesn't. So yeah, they're very much committed to that, which is super cool. So yeah, this makes sense like 100% for them to be collaborating with Mint.
Yeah, and
really cool,
as Clem says, it's not just a thing for publicizing or promoting Mint. It will make Mint better because you've now got some regular hardware that you're testing it on and checking things out on, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're never going to have that kind of vertical integration that people talk about with Apple and Mac OS and stuff like that. But having these kinds of partnerships, it's the way forward, isn't it? I'm just saying it's never going to be as tight as that, is it? Really?
Well,
in the Linux world.
Taking the long view, honestly, I'll say I'm not going to say never, because I've seen so many things change in the last few years that I never thought would happen. So anything's possible. But anyway, all right. So Nintendo Switch 2 controversy, was that Joe?
Yeah, this is Joe's little baby.
Yeah, and I am going to say some of it's probably way overhyped, over dramatized, but there still is some valid issues here with the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, I wanted to discuss some of the hate around it and see if you guys feel the same way or not, or think it's worse or better than it actually is. First, the price of the Switch 2 is $450 to start for a handheld. The Nintendo Switch 1 was $300 at launch, and I do have the link in there to show the pricing. So, do you think that's too much to pay for a handheld?
So, firstly, it would be interesting to know what that $300 is adjusted for inflation now.
Yeah, how many years ago was it that the first?
Because it's been 8 years since 8 years, 2017. Yeah. So I would hazard a guess that that's probably 360, 370 in today's money. Just as a guess. So, in that context, it's only another $70, $80 more. It's still expensive. Nobody's denying it's expensive, but probably not out of the realms of feasibility.
Does the tariffs have anything to do with this? And I don't mean that there is.
I was thinking
tariffs,
that too.
Yeah, that they're hedging their bets against tariffs.
These
because,
prices were actually set before the tariffs came in.
Okay.
That is something to keep in mind.
before
I
they
did read
came
that
in,
one of the
but he
articles.
was threatening tariffs.
True, yeah. So I mean, they would have had to have thought about it, even if they didn't know
Yes,
what
that's
was
right.
going to happen.
Mm,
You
mhm.
don't get to be as
Okay.
big as Nintendo without knowing how to predict things.
Well, how much is the Steam Deck?
The
Well,
Steam Deck is a little bit more though, and it does more than the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steam
Not.
Deck, I, th- yeah, 450, 500, maybe even sometime. Because I'm not sure what the pricing on the OLED was when it first came out. But
I'm thinking, if I'm not mistaken, and my friend, he was wanting to get the other one, the non, and then he ended up getting the OLED because of the price difference. And he, I'm thinking, don't quote me on this, but of course this is pre, tariffs and everything else. Because he bought this thing when it came out, whenever, however long ago, like a year or whatever or so ago. I'm thinking he said it was $500. Because
yeah,
I'm thinking the non OLED was like 350,
so
400.
similar price. But I'm gonna say that the Steam Deck does a lot more. I mean, you can run it as a
Yeah.
full freaking desktop if you want to.
Okay,
It's
so by the way,
it's-
I've just checked dollar times. $300 in 2017 is worth $391 today. So in that context, it's only $50 more for a bigger screen, more powerful. Seems fair enough. I mean, that's not something I'd buy, but I mean,
Well, there's also the Nintendo tax, just like you have the Apple tax.
yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and
I
then
d-
to the next point, though, if we let Joe continue, the games are also a big part of this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe
The
move
next
into
point
that.
I wanted to bring up there actually had a lot to do with the games. The, it seems a lot more expensive because you're paying $70 to $80 for their new top end games, and then also I don't have it listed here, but even moving Switch 1 games to Switch 2 is not free. You're paying like $10 a game, even though you've already purchased the game. And another thing that really pisses me off, and it always has, is DLC on day one. So you can purchase the game, but you're not purchasing the whole game. If you want the whole game, you have to pay another like $20 to get all the DLCs that are currently available on day one.
But that's
So
that's kind
this,
of an industry thing, though, right? I mean,
yeah,
Now, it's still a
yes,
disgusting industry
yeah,
thing.
I think that's the point, isn't
yeah.
it? There's the two aspects of it. There's the one aspect that this is unfortunately the way the world is going. You don't own your own stuff. You don't own your movies. You don't own your apps. You don't, do you even own your phone? Sometimes you feel like, right?
Right.
Yeah. At the same, so yes, the industry is going towards this. At the same time, it's not a good thing. I don't think I don't like the idea that I buy something but it's still not mine. Or I mean, we've talked about this before. Like if you've got Amazon Prime, you buy a movie on Amazon Prime. You think you've bought it. A couple of months later, they lose the rights to it. Suddenly, you can't watch the movie that you spent 20 quid on, right? I mean, it's just bollocks, right? So in that sense, it's just same shit, different day.
Yes,
I'm
but
not surprised.
that brings up the next point
Okay.
that I have with the games. Like even now, well, with the Switch 2, even if you buy a game cartridge, all that game cartridge gets you is a download link, which then pulls the game onto your device. Which game key cards give users a full download of the game rather than allowing them to simply play it right out of the box. So you have to have that internet connection, and you can't store it anywhere else other than on the device. And that was from Games Radar. It also means that you can't preserve copies of it.
Yeah.
I can't just 20 years from now, when Nintendo is no longer supporting the Switch 2, pull out the cartridge, stick it in, and start playing the version 1 of the game. I can understand not being able to get updates or whatever, but I should be able to play that original version on the cartridge at any time if I bought the game. It really...
Okay.
Yes, I understand it will also prevent piracy and things like that because people won't be able to just, copy the thing. But maybe my old man is just creeping out and get off my lawn. This isn't the way to do things. But I don't know. What's your guys' opinion?
You're 100% right. You're absolutely 100% right, and I agree with nearly.
Old man?
No, well, yeah, you are an old man, definitely. But no, your point is correct that this is it's not an optimum state of affairs. It's there's an expectation if you buy things that they belong to you, that you should have the right to do what you want with them, etc., etc., etc. What I would say though is the Switch 2 is not marketed towards you or me, right? In the same way that, say, a Steam Deck is. It is marketed towards the general masses, the normies, whatever you want to call them. People who will buy this for their kids, or the non-technical people who would just like to play a bit of Mario Kart or whatever. And so
those are the same people that are going to get mad when they can't repair their stuff because they didn't take it to a Nintendo certified repair whatever.
Yeah,
and got the screen replaced after their kid broke it.
True. They'll get mad about it. But they would have still bought it originally, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's that same cohort of people 5, 6, 7, 8 years later who will be then buying the next Switch. So from a purely business perspective, knowing your audience, knowing who it is you're selling these things to, I'm not surprised at all. I think it's bollocks, but I'm not surprised at all by this. It's the same thing of for years people have said, oh, why doesn't Apple allow side loading, as an example, right? I mean, I know that's it's in the news and there's things happening and all that third-party app stores and all that sort of stuff and whatever. But was there really a massive clamoring from amongst most Apple iPhone users to be able to sideload? I'm not sure there was really. It's just the enshittification of society just getting worse, isn't it? If nothing belongs to you, nothing is yours. You pay for the privilege of using this shit. Do you know what I mean? It's as I said, it's not something I'd ever buy. And I wouldn't even buy it for my kids, to be completely honest. But there's going to be people out there. I know a mate of mine who bought, was it last Christmas or the Christmas before? He bought 3 Switch OLEDs, one for himself and one each for his daughters, who are 5 and 4. Because I was getting a good deal. I got 3 for price of this or whatever, and I'm like, okay, all right.
Because Amazon is doing the same thing with the Kindle. You can't get anything in or out of the Kindle unless you go through Amazon.
Yeah.
So those things are annoying, but the crux of the issue is what, Joe? That they can disable it now, right?
Well, no. Okay, see, this is a controversial point right here. Nintendo now says it can disable your Switch or potentially even your new Switch 2 if you don't follow its user agreement. Nintendo has updated its user agreement, toughening its stance on those who pirate games, attempt to emulate titles, or otherwise modify their consoles. That's directly from Tech Radar. But it has been pointed out to me that it's a bit blown out of proportion since other companies do the same and Nintendo has done similar in the past. The wording that is causing the problem is Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services and or the applicable Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part.
Yeah,
but
and I
this
think
is
that,
supposed to be-
and I think that's the line that's important.
Yes.
Because, yes, I mean, because I looked at some of this stuff yesterday after Joe mentioned that he wanted to look into this, and we had a bit of a Discord conversation about it as well, and it's a bit unclear, and I wonder if that lack of clarity is on purpose. To make because if you are a not necessarily particularly technical person, but you did think about maybe having other maybe doing a little bit of modification of your device, you're now going to definitely not do it now. Do you know what I mean? You're gonna be scared off from doing it. Whether they would actually brick your device, it's ambiguous, isn't it? Maybe that ambiguity is on purpose.
Yeah, well, no, the wording is such that it should just be in regards to your Nintendo account services. I still find it disturbing that they can brick it. But if you are going to hack Nintendo services, then you should be banned or prosecuted. But that's, piracy, whatever. They shouldn't brick your device. That's something that you paid for. They should not have the right to say, nope, your device don't work no more.
What's interesting to me
right.
is how these kind of things resonate with normal people. And, well, we all know what I mean when I say normal.
Most people aren't even going to look into it.
It flies right over. They're aware of what has been said about it, but to them, this is kind of a normal thing. As long as they get to play their games, they don't care. It's only really people like us that see these devices as, okay, you buy the device, and this is just kind of like the thing that we use to consume the content. And once we pay for the content, we feel some sort of ownership over it, And it's been nuanced, slowly over the years, hasn't it? To where you don't really own anything.
I think people like us instead end up with Steam Decks because we want to be able to do that sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Thankfully, there is somewhere we can go. I mean, my Steam Deck's just here. This is great radio. People can see me holding up the Steam Deck.
But if you want to consume Nintendo-like games, because the games that show up on Nintendo are just by design a different sort of game than what you might get on a Steam Deck.
True. But I'm just saying,
Yeah, we tend to go to devices like that because we feel like we feel like they would be less likely to execute on the whole "you don't own it" kind of concept that we're just starting to become really aware of, But I think it really exists there as well. It's just that we don't. They don't make it seem as, I don't know. Is it because we trust companies like Valve more than we do?
No, I just think it's. Well, actually, maybe we do trust Valve a bit more.
Valve will let you download your entire library if you want to. They have plans put into place if they ever go out of business.
Yeah. So see, Valve is going for a different consumer base, isn't it?
It seems like they understand. They understand that they've got people like us, taking part in.
And there's plenty of people like that that they can then leverage and they can then make money from. So it's a case of knowing your audience. Steam's audience is the Steam Deck's audience is fundamentally different to the Switch 2's audience.
I think some of the outrage from the discussions I've had on some Telegram groups is the problem with 40-year-old games. Because if you have a NES or a SNES title from 35, 40 years ago, and you don't have the unit to play it on anymore, but you have the actual cartridge, CD, whatever, you can't use it unless it's plugged in to that machine, because there's the whole people that have the emulators. And Nintendo, like a fierce, hungry animal, will pounce on you worse than the RIAA from 25 years ago to sue you out of oblivion for trying to do that. So
And
I'm
it's
thinking
so
that's where
silly,
some of
isn't
the,
it? Because I mean, how much of a demographic is the emulator crowd? Honestly, how many? Is it even enough to justify the money that they would spend to litigate that kind of thing?
exactly.
It's probably not as small a community as you're thinking that it is, but yeah, I can kind of see your point there. It's not going to be a ginormous community.
No, I don't think so. But they might not. They might think. They might think, well, if we let this through, then it's the hole in the dam that just turns into a huge.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's paranoid about keeping their markets and they're keeping their margins and keeping their things. So, yeah.
They would be better
Why
off
does
to
Nintendo
understand.
care?
They would be better
Why
off
does
to
Nintendo
understand.
care?
Well, yeah, and they'd be better off to understand as well that there are people that use these emulators that otherwise would just plain not play your games. Otherwise, they
Or you allow these emulators, and then us old people set it up, and we let our kids play it, and then our kids want to play the new versions of these old games that they got to play.
yes. So you could consider it an advertising cost almost. I've kind of felt that
Which
way
then,
since the beginning.
which then makes you think. I can't imagine a standard business executive being that long-sighted.
They should.
They should be,
Yeah.
but I can't imagine they would be.
Well,
They'd
because
be looking more at the short term.
they're dealing with what their shareholders believe in.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Exactly my point.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
Cool. Well, I think we beat that one to death a little bit, actually. Shall we move? Yeah, shall we move on to what Eric wanted to talk about, which was about Fedora?
Yeah. So, it struck me as yet another example of Fedora sort of leading the charge. So, they've decided, and I took some information from a Phronix article, so it's linked in the show notes, but the Fedora Engineering and Steering Committee signed off on May 20th on the plan change for Fedora 43 that the GNOME desktop in their workstation, like the main version, will be Wayland only. So the GNOME X11 packages will be removed in this next Fedora Linux release. So Fedora 43 will be shipped this autumn with GNOME 49 and is cleared to only ship with Wayland support, although X-Wayland support is still sticking around to be able to run X11 clients from within GNOME Wayland session. And as usual, as I alluded to, Fedora and GNOME are pushing forward with new technology. In this case, it's pushing to make Wayland the default display manager for the Linux desktop, and this is just sort of part of their methodology. They have a history of being an early adopter. So when you think back, they did Systemd back in 2011. They took up Pipewire over Pulse Audio, and now they're pushing for Wayland only. And generally, they're sort of the again, they're the vanguard. They're the ones that make these decisions, and then we see everyone else kind of falling along behind them. So that was really, my main reason for wanting to mention it was it feels like after, 15 years
God, it's
of
been a long
kind of
time.
not really
Yeah.
getting much traction, Wayland is finally pretty much, there's still some corner cases and some issues for certain people, but, by and large, I think at this point, they've gotten that 90% solution. And I can't imagine it's going to be much longer because most desktops have a Wayland session now, or they're thick into developing it. And so
Yeah. I had two comments. One was broadly in agreement with you in that, yes, Fedora does do this because that's kind of the raison d'etre of Fedora. It's to kind of, incorporate new technologies, move things forward, see how things go. And all of that kind of whatever is learnt from Fedora is what ends up in RHEL, in however long time. That's kind of the way that Red Hat works. So in one sense it's not surprising, and in another sense it's good. The other comment I just wanted to make was, and this is just from someone who is a noob, right? Why has it taken so long for Wayland to become... when you're right, it's almost 15 years. It was around the time when I first, booted up a live CD of Ubuntu 11.10 or whatever it was.
And there have been multiple pushes for it to be adopted by things
Well,
like
the thing
picked
is,
it up and dropped it.
It's not just a display manager. It handles all of the inputs as well, and it really takes a push to get all of these different projects. That the projects is handling all of the interactions with the mouse, and then the keyboard shortcuts and all this. This was huge. This took a lot of effort from a lot of different directions.
X11. You have to remember some things about X11 to understand why Wayland took so long to get put into any kind of position. Yes, X11 is a bunch of spaghetti code.
Yeah.
And it's completely insecure because it's all over the place. But it's also been around for a really long time, and it has all these different features that when you're trying to start something new, example Wayland, it's going to take a really long time to implement in a secure fashion, or in as good of a fashion as X11 does. Like, how long did it take for Wayland to implement screen sharing before you could actually do a proper screen share with Wayland? That's why X11 has stuck around so long.
Well, and keep in mind, what Wayland requires is all of the window managers individually have to handle the compositing and things like that. It requires it moves the onus on different functionality from the display server, from the input server onto the individual window managers, and that means that everybody has that much more work to do to come on board with it. Well, why should we focus on that? Why should we move that up the chain when this thing over here already works?
Right. So it's a paradigm shift that can't be done in isolation. It requires an enormous amount of cooperation and collaboration between lots of different developers and projects and things like that. So that's a big part of it. Two, the scope of functionality that it's undertaking and trying to do by technically replacing X11 is enormous. And also, like to Bill's point, it's one of those situations where everything was developed for X, and it's just like, why are we doing this? Like, what is the main reason? And really now, the main reason is because X isn't really being maintained anymore. I mean, of course, if there's some sort of like terrible security flaw or a bug or something, they will deal with it. But ultimately, like, it's just not, it's a dead project at this point. And in order for us to move forward, in terms of the Linux desktop specifically, like, this has to happen. And yeah, of course, screen sharing, there are very like hot button things that have happened that needed to be addressed. But in a project like this, you can't actually get to the point where you're making the important changes that affect people until it's in front of them, right? Until you have a critical mass of people actually adopting it, or at least trying to adopt it, and seeing like what the friction points are. What needs to change in order to make it, again, a 90% or higher solution for most people. And that's really what's been happening very quickly, if you think about it. So we went for 13 of those 15 years, probably very, very little kind of news about it, very little push on it. At least it was, again, something that was like overt and public. And, there's now been this very strong push by the people who matter, making this, a front and center issue. And I feel like, again, 2 years ago when I tried to use Wayland, it was kind of impossible. And a lot of that was just, again, but where it was in its development. But now when I use it, I mean, there might be something I notice, but by and large, it seems to be, faster. It just seems to be the better solution, and it's just going to take a little bit more time, I think, to get it to be, close to 100% instead of 90%, right? There's still going to be some rough edges, but, like Bill said, it wasn't just simply a 1-for-1 replacement. Like they shifted completely, like the way things worked. So it wasn't just, it's X11 version 2 or something. It's a completely different, shift. So anyway, I that was my point in wanting to discuss the story, is just that I have a lot of respect for Fedora for, doing this, for being sort of the people who are willing to take that risk, and being that they actually pull it off. I mean, I feel like Fedora used to be much more difficult to deal with, between the, no software that wasn't free, and then just like some of the repository
there is still a little
things.
bit. There is still a little bit.
A little bit, but
cuts
nowhere
and whatever.
near. I mean, 3 years ago, if you were to run Fedora 36 or something, compared to like the 40 series,
Way
there's
easier
no
to get up and
comparison.
running.
Like, it is
No, that's
so
true.
much easier now. They've even decided to finally fix the installer, which has always been an annoyance to me because of the layout and the UI part of it. So they're really, they've made some enormous changes. Not only in the project itself, but then, like they just continue to push the forward on these fundamental technologies. And so,
And one more
kudos
thing.
to
As I
them
said, as I said, I think it's because of what Fedora is. What is its reasons for existence? Do you know what I mean? It is, to showcase these things so that they can then be put into a commercial product later.
I think they do that from a position of authority too, because we've looked to Fedora as the thing. All right, when Fedora switches to this thing, it means, all right, that means everybody else needs to start falling in line. We kind of
right. They
see
make
it that way.
they make it acceptable and like safe to do, because it's like, well, they were able to do it. So
and I'm just contrasting that to say something like Ubuntu, in which Ubuntu itself is the product. If you understand what I mean, that's where that's what Canonical is making its money from. Ubuntu server or IoT versions or whatever it might be. And so, therefore, in a distro like that, you're going to have different considerations. You're going to maybe be a little bit more reticent about using the newest technologies. But then I suppose you could argue Canonical have tried to have a balance of that with having LTS, and then also having the kind of the interim releases as well. So it's just a different way. But I think because of, as I said, the reason for Fedora's existence and the way that Red Hat's business model work, it sometimes works well. As in the whole Linux community benefits from from that.
I mean, who here thinks that Pulse was a better experience than Pipewire? I mean, there's really all the Bluetooth issues and all of the. I mean, so that's really what I'm getting at, is like they've improved. When I think of Linux, desktop Linux, and what my experience was, even 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 15 years ago, to what it is today, it is so nearly turnkey. That you just literally install it. You, of course, put in, whatever software and things like that. There's some amount of customization you do, but I mean, the amount of like just annoying pain in the ass stuff you have to do now is so minimal compared to what it used to be. That this, and I credit a lot of it to organizations like Fedora, who are willing to do the hard work and the painful work of pulling people kicking and streaming into the future. So anyway,
excellent.
That was
good
one thing I wanted to say about excuse me, one thing I wanted to say quick about in my research for my history stuff I do with X is it was started by one person. There was a window manager on Unix excuse me, called W, and without going into the technical, things that reasons for why they didn't want to use it, he forked it and created X. Why X? Because the alphabet. It was the next letter. And it was basically dog fooded from there because nobody liked using W. So everyone was using X, so they were scratching their own itch, updating it. And the time, while you were talking, I looked up the release. We're currently, if I'm not mistaken here, without wasting too much time here, we are still using X11 R6, which means it's X server version 11, release number 6. It was released in May of 1994.
Oof.
It was originally, well, I would have to go back and read my history stuff to refresh my memory, but from what I can remember, X Server 1 was released in 1984, and very quickly it became X4, going up. And I think, let me do it real quick here, see if the search gods will help me here. X11 Release 1 was released in September 15th of 1987. Now you have to remember, this was all started on Unix machines. These were all HBUX, Spark, CentOS. Well, Spark came from, I meant to say Solaris. Solaris came from, some CentOS. But anyways, these are all Unix. And I'm thinking about the time when FreeBSD in 1994, if I'm not mistaken, 1992, somewhere around there, it was the BSD 386 project, and they wanted a window manager for a PCAT x86 version of Unix to use. And they ported X11 release 6 to use on what we're, and basically then another project adapted it to X386, which if you go back far enough into the 90s when Linux first came out, X386 was the X server. It was the x86 version ported from the FreeBSD or the BSD 386 project. So, and the last thing I'll say here, so I stop rambling, is the reason they say 15 years of development of Wayland. Well, if you look at the time difference between the last release of X and when they replaced it, is longer than X even existed.
Mm.
So, and you talk about what Joe said, spaghetti code. There is a group, somebody had mentioned this in one of the Telegram groups I'm in. Some group ported X11R6. They're going to keep it going. And even because another thing that people don't realize is the people that made X11 are the same people that are making Wayland. I mean, maybe not the original people, obviously, because of the time, 1980s, but if the people that intricately know how it works are telling you not to use it, that's saying something.
Mm.
Okay, guys. This is another topic we have beat to death.
Yeah, okay. So
one left in the news.
That's what we do.
So that's just what we do. Just the way that we roll here. All right. So last news thing is from me. It is that the final episode, final edition
countdown
of Linux Format magazine was released a couple of days ago, and it is the end of an era. 25 years of open source. It started off in early 2000s. So it's a British magazine. It was actually the latest, if you want to say, in a long line of something format machines. Magazines. There were. I remember having Amiga format back in the 90s. There used to be PC format. I'm sure there was something similar around consoles as well. And if you read, so in this edition, they've got a retrospective of the last 25 years, and you just look at the names that are mentioned. First editor being Nick Veach, who people who are into Amigas would know. He was one of the he used to edit quite a few Amiga magazines. Some of the other contributors, Graham Morrison, who's on the Late Night Linux family, Mike Saunders, who used to be on a Linux Voice podcast, etc. It's just names that we've all heard at some point, been involved. They've all been involved in some way at some point in Linux format. And yeah, it's the end of an era that it's finishing. But it's a good last magazine in that it's got a whole section on classic reviews. So it's going back and getting its review of Debian 2.1, for example, or SUSE 6.3, or Ubuntu 5.04, and you can read the original review of when it came out. And it's also got some stuff for the future as well, because we all know that Windows 10 is coming out of support. We would love it if people were to move over to Linux, and there's a whole guide in here on well, first there's a whole thing about different distros, but then it's also there's a whole section on how to install Mint, escape Windows 10 by putting Mint on it, and step by step, how to make your installation media and how to encrypt your hard drive and this, that, and the other. Now, you could argue that someone who is picking up a venerable Linux magazine that's been around for 25 years probably knows a lot of those bits already, but it's the way that magazines are, isn't it? Magazines are in shops, they're in stores, they're in newsagents. People advertise, and there is an expectation that somebody who isn't necessarily a Linux nerd would pick it up and buy it, in the same way that I remember buying PC magazines or PlayStation magazines and stuff like that.
Now,
The other thing is, go on.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and the other thing, reading it made me realize that we have lost something in the way that we consume information now. In now, we look for something specific on the internet. We look for a guide on how to do something specific. I've been complaining all about my NAS troubles, for example, and I've been looking for specific, guides on how to sort my hard disk out and Synology or whatever it might be. It's very atomized. You're looking for something specific that you then, that fulfills your need. Looking, just flicking through this edition, and you're seeing, stuff. I was looking at something. Oh, there's a whole thing on coding here. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, there's a whole thing on, how to do this, how to do that. Things that I would be interested in, but maybe not something I'm going out looking for. And it just made me think, society has changed. Our way of consuming information has changed.
I'm going to agree with you. But no, because I used to love going into Barnes & Noble and going through the different Linux magazines and the different tech magazines, and like the Hacker Weekly or whatever it was. There were several of them, but most specifically that comes to mind is like Magpie Magazine, which is Raspberry Pi based. But that's where Raspberry Pi first put out the Raspberry Pi Zero. Not the W, but the original Zero. And the magazine was $15 at the time, which at the time seemed like a lot for a magazine, but if you were getting a free piece of hardware with it, that was kind of cool. And I used to also love, getting the different CDs with the different distros or the different applications for you to test out, and then going through the magazines and seeing the things that I thought was cool, but I hadn't really thought about, going and researching myself, and that opened avenues. The problem got to be $15 was bad enough for a magazine. But as time went on, if you go in and look now, you're looking at like $30, $35 for a magazine.
Really? Is that how much you're paying over there?
For a magazine, for a tech magazine. Now I understand it's got a smaller user base, so the profit margins are a little bit smaller. But come on, I'm not paying that much for a magazine. Not happening.
Well, I
No,
think
I
that
mean-
that increase in price is just directly because they're just not as popular as they once were.
Yeah,
And-
but I don't think it ever got that expensive in the UK. I mean, I have seen magazines for £15, but I've never seen one more than that. I've seen guidebooks that have been more. Yeah, I agree. Like, you
Well,
might
that's
get,
how you used to get your ISOs, right? To install Linux
Yeah.
on your
Yeah, yeah.
machines.
Yeah.
Is to
A lot easier than trying to download them and put
Right.
them onto disks
Yeah.
yourself.
in a time before high-speed internet, was as nearly as ubiquitous as it is now. CDs coming out with the Linux magazines, they were kind of something to look forward to. So,
But
have we
Yeah,
lost
just
downloading
checked.
over.
Huh?
Well, listen, I mean, there is something to be said for holding something in your hand,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And a physical thing that you flip the pages
Absolutely.
and you look at the, and it is a loss. It is, and it's not maybe a great loss, and maybe the world isn't going to mourn, that it's gone, but it is a shame. It just basically feels like once it's gone, it's never going to come back, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there'll almost certainly never be another magazine like Linux format.
And I've heard
Right.
I've heard Graham talk about this on Late Night Linux more than once, how all the nuances involved to sell magazines, and it was really, really difficult. It's always been really, really difficult to make any money selling magazines because the margin for profit was just next to nothing by the time you paid everybody that actually did the journalism, and then you had to buy your place on the shelf at the grocery store or wherever you were selling the magazine. It was it was really, really difficult. So that was in a time when the format was a bit more popular. So nowadays when people are, I can just download the ISO, or I can just look on the website to get the article. You're right, though. We have lost something because holding something in your hand is a bit more of a visceral sort of experience, isn't it? And then when that new version of Ubuntu comes out, or that new version of Fedora, and there's a CD in there with your new copy of whatever magazine, that experience, we've kind of lost that. But it was always kind of a situation where they were barely making enough to get by doing it. So the least little thing would probably throw the whole thing into imbalance, So
Yeah, there's no way it was never just a labor of love. I mean, I don't think anyone got rich off of it.
No.
Right.
So
And
anyway,
as expensive as they are, and I do like having the physical magazine in my hand in a lot of cases, just to be able to re-reference things, go back to things, whatever. Looking right now at the Magpie, the Raspberry Pi official magazine, I can download the PDF for free.
yeah, you can.
Yeah. Very true.
And print it
And
up
so,
if you want
and,
to.
and why would you, but yeah, I mean, as I said, I think it's like somebody once said to me, I used to have a colleague who used to be into current affairs, and so we'd always be talking about what's happening in the clusterfuck that is the world at the minute, and he'd kind of say that he stopped reading news sites. So I was like, interesting. Why you got an interest in current affairs, but you've stopped reading news sites? He goes, because there's no point just knowing information about something. You need to know what it means. And so what he would do is he would every couple of weeks get one of these magazines like The Economist or The Spectator, or all these kinds of magazines which kind of did an analysis on what had happened, because then there'd been a little bit of time since the thing had happened, and now people were trying to analyze it. I mean, and it's kind of almost the same kind of way with a lot of these magazines. Do you know what I mean? They weren't just giving you their hot take. There was a bit of a measured understanding and, viewpoint that was being given. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, I know that's a little bit of a tangent that I've just gone off on, but as I said, it's a wistful nostalgia. Shall we put it that way? Hey, that's the name. That's the name of the episode. Hey, wistful nostalgia. Anyway,
write that down.
for this supposed to be being shorter, it has sure been
longer.
less
Yeah.
articles, but
No.
longer.
This is good, though.
I don't
This
think
is
that the
good.
intention was shorter. It was just was
more
different.
interactive. Okay,
Yeah.
we've
Yes.
done that.
Thank you, sir.
I do appreciate the more interactive nature of this portion. I'm just saying that if less time in our seat was what we were going for, we have failed miserably.
Well,
it's only been an hour.
Yeah,
because we started.
I
at
think we're making a
3:15.
better show, though.
Yeah, I think
yeah, definitely. It's already been a more interesting show than more often. Yeah. Anyway,
I've enjoyed the conversation.
Excellent.
But I did want to make a mention too, even though this is not the topic of what we were saying, is that Linux Journal was also a good staple of Linux print media. Because I think Linux Format and Linux Journal were probably the two publications. And even towards the end of the publication, I mean, I was paying $12 for like Linux Journal. Yeah. Something like that. I can't remember how much it was, but I got value out of it. And yeah, granted, my Motor Trend subscription was $12 for the whole year, and I paid $12 for one magazine, but I got much more out of that Linux Journal, episode, or not episode, but edition, whatever you want to call it, than I did out of Motor Trend, because I could have watched the same thing on Motor Trend TV on cable, type of thing. Because there are things on Linux Journal I had copied. I don't have them anymore. I wish I did, but clutter, trying to declutter life. But yeah, and some of the stuff is so outdated it's not really usable anymore. But yeah, there's articles that I had dog-eared and went back to many times because of the value of it.
Excellent. All right. Let's move on then. So we would now be talking about security and privacy, but we haven't got any security or privacy to talk about this time round. We are no longer going to be doing our bi-weekly wanderings. These are now going to be moved to the Saturday Roundtable episode. This does not mean that it's not interactive. We want people to come on and talk to us as we've always done on the Roundtable. We just thought it would be better if we talk about our projects and our
we're trying to streamline
adventures and our adventures there, because I just think we just thought it would work better as an interactive session. So that will be at the next roundtable next week, which is it's the 14th, isn't it? The 14th of June.
Let's have a quick look, shall we?
Yes.
It's the 14th.
So we're going to move on and do our Linux. Yeah, I'm going to move on and we're going to do our Linux innards, in which Dale has kindly turned back up to continue what he talked about on episode 458, which was, why should I explain when the man himself, the man of the moment, is here himself? Dale, take it away.
I think you mentioned it. I kind of feel like the 1940s radio presenter saying, "We last left our intrepid hero."
Brilliant.
Well,
We last left our intrepid truck driver on episode 458. Now he's back and he's angry. No, he's not actually.
So if you want to get more of the background of what I'm going to be talking about, go back and listen to or read the show notes for episode 458, because it gives some context, but that context is I try to embellish a little bit so you don't have. So it's sort of like going into the middle of a season of an episode of a TV series and you're not completely lost. So I try to update you on there. But any case, where we left off here was the dawn of the 3G networks, third generation wireless networks. And we're going to go back to the United States because there were parallel developments between UK and Europe and the United States and any other European country or Asian territory that decided to go with the American technology versus what the Europeans in the UK were developing on their own. And everything was sort of regulated over one group called the ITU, which I'll discuss here in the article, and the International Telegraph Union. They date back a couple hundred years. And it started with the telegraph. And they made sure that everyone could communicate. So everyone has a standard to work on. And they started another thing, to do wireless. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. But I just wanted to preface that with this isn't sort of like ad hoc. We're just going about our own ways. These are still somewhat industry standard things that they were competing against, which basically sort of like the Beta versus VHS and the old different things of modems back in the 1990s where one brand wouldn't connect to another brand, because of anti-competitiveness. Any case, we still had the 2G, which it was the slow data. It was really pretty much, in comparison, not really that usable. The 2G and the 3G still had their own data, and they could do simple, web pages and stuff. And it's kind of funny in hindsight. They referred to it as mobile broadband, but it was nowhere near what we would consider broadband. But you also have to preface it with the fact of we still had dial-up modems then. We still had people on 128K ISDN lines. So what the phones could do was basically what you could do at home. So there really wasn't that much of a, people complaining that it was slow. So this ability to have internet on a phone, and I say, internet with scare quotes, was spawned a rebirth of PDAs. Because before, PDAs were basically this calendar and message-taking apps. And they spawned a new device. They're still considered like PDAs, but they're basically phones with bigger screens. And sort of like Palm evolved their stuff, and some of the other ones that I'm blanking on the product names. But
Dell Axum X51V.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Yeah, I forgot about the Dell. Yeah, that's one of the ones I was blanking on. So they were pretty much in the Newton, the Apple Newton, which is a whole nother rabbit hole of nonconformity. But another thing I wanted to touch briefly on is the web browsing on the phone, because today we take it for granted that you just go to the web version of Spotify, the web version of Facebook, or the web version of Discord, type of thing. That wasn't how it was back then. The early phones had a text graphical interface that was similar to Gopher, and if you're of our generation, Gopher was basically like a menu-based web browsing where you actually had menu items. There wasn't really, you could load up graphics, like a GIF image that would take 5 minutes to download. But that's what we used on the computers. So it was similar to what we had on the phone, and that was called WAP, W-A-P, which stood for Wireless Access Protocol. And it was released in 1999. And it wasn't widely adopted and had a lot of issues. It for one, it wasn't compatible with web standards with HTML. It used its own language called WML. And it was like a markup language like HTML. And I couldn't really find what it really stood for. There was different variations of people, so I don't think anyone really knew. At least I couldn't find. A gateway was also required on the mobile carrier's network, on the mobile provider. And this was basically a proxy between the HTTP and the HTTPS, so that the phone pretty much communicated like a proxy to it. Now, the second version of WAP was released in 2002, and it was completely gutted, re-engineered, and it used a custom version of XHTML, which was a standard on computers, which is what HTML was based on when Tim Berners-Lee created HTML. He originally created XHTML. And the mobile version was called XHTML MP. And WAP 2.0 removed the need of the proxy, the gateway on the mobile provider's network, so that the phones could do their own HTTP and the HTTPS. And the XHTML MP would also provide information about the phone, pretty much like our current browsers today say that this is a Linux computer using Firefox version, yada, 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 just for compatibility's sake on the web server's end. Now, some of the providers started offering services for the 2.0 in 2003 into 2004, and it gained some more popularity. Though, because of the popularity also of using a USB cable to tether your laptop to your phone or to use your phone itself, it wasn't really that much favorable, because it all depended on your phone too, because some phones are a little bit more geared towards the internet than other phones, because of the actual operating system that the firmware that the phones used. But most phones were basically not really what you would consider internet. Today it was basically very text oriented, and for heaven's sakes, you you did not want to open an image on your phone, because you did not want to try to look at a 640 by 480 image on a 1.8 inch screen. Didn't work real well. And it stuck around, believe it or not, until 2013.
Really?
Which is a lot longer than I think it should have. Yeah, Majid. That blew my mind too, because I'm like, really? I mean, 2013, I had 100 megabit cable modem with, I think, 2 or 3 megabit up by that point. So, and I think my BlackBerry, of course, it was an outlier, and I don't really mention this in here because BlackBerry, the BIS, BlackBerry Information Server, was something completely outside the purview of this discussion we're having today. But they had their own. They had their own interface, which was much better. Yeah, like Bill just said, it was much better than what you'd have on a basic phone. So my memory of this day was kind of skewed because of the BIS. Now, moving on to further developments here. And like I said, I wanted to catch you up in case you didn't read the last show notes or listen to the last 458. There was 2 organizations from the ITU-R, the radio division of the ITU. And they were 3GPP and 3GPP2. 3GPP was the organization that regulated the standards in the UK and Europe. 3GPP2 was the regulation branch in the United States that covered any countries that didn't want to follow 3GPP. That included parts of South America, not really North Korea because of reasons. South Korea, China, Japan. There were some other outliers. I think At one point, I'm not sure if this is in my notes here, but Australia at one point was CDMA, and then they eventually switched over to the GMS, UTMS that I'll be talking about here in a couple minutes. So the 3GPP2 created CDMA 2000, and it was the name for the 3G standard in the United States and territories that used it. It was also known as C2K, IMT-MC, which is IMT multi-carrier, and it was the predecessor to CDMA1, which was the IS-95 interim standard for 2G. And forgive me when I trip over these, because these acronyms get longer and longer. They were definitely made by nerds, and I mean propeller head nerds. So, what does this all mean?
Okay, most people are not going to get that reference. I'm just going to point that out to you. You are showing not only your age, but your level of nerdiness when you talk about a propeller head nerd. Okay? You might want to explain that. Then again, you might just want to let it slip past.
So back when the world was black and white, go ahead, Dale.
I forgot about the reference because I do show my age quite a bit. The propeller, I guess the best way to put it is a beanie. And this beanie had a shaft on the top of it in the center, where the button would be on a regular beanie, with a propeller blade. And it would just spin around. And nerds thought that that was a cool thing to be wearing because it was spinning around and made you look cool.
I've heard I've heard an origin of this somewhere, and I'm trying to look it up now. It didn't just come out of nowhere.
I know. I don't remember the origin.
What was it? Was it Little Rascals that had Spanky was wearing a hat like that, or?
Yeah, there was also like a cartoon or something. It was very much in the style of Richie Rich, but I don't think it was Richie Rich, with the kid that had the propeller beanie and was using it to fly around or some crap.
The beanie had different colors, but you couldn't tell because the world was black and white, like I said, in those days.
Yeah.
I'm
not quite that old.
I'm trying to figure out where, because I think I remember hearing a story where kids and people are screaming into their radios right now. I just know there was a place where kids were getting these things at the time, but only like the really super nerds were wearing them out in public. I know I've heard this story somewhere, but I can't. I'm struggling to pull up exactly where I got it from.
My bad. I sidetracked us. Please continue.
Talk about digress.
No problem. Digression is good though sometimes.
It is.
But yeah, a lot of things come from TV. Sort of like, I don't want to derail us again, but as a brief mention, it's sort of like diamonds. Until motion pictures came became a thing, diamonds were worthless as jewelry. They weren't even a thing. They were basically used for drill bits. And because of unprocessed, the diamonds before they're turned into drill bits kind of sparkle. And black and white films, they wanted stuff that would catch people's eyes, and that's why they started using these diamonds in jewelry, because they caught the eye of people in the movies. But that's the thing you can search on your own. It's a very fascinating thing of how it turned into a multi-billion-dollar industry of selling diamonds as rings, but as jewelry. So, what is CDMA? That's a good question. It is Code Division Multiple Access. It is a channel access method used by various communication technologies. And CDMA is one of these examples, where several transmitters can send information over a single communication channel. Now, I'm just making this very simple because when we really get into the weeds, once we get into this, about different ways of forming signals and things, it really makes it like a turboprop beanie, propeller head. So this allows for several users to share a band of frequencies. To permit this without undue interference between the users, CDMA employs a spread spectrum technology. It's also the same thing that you have in wireless routers in your Wi-Fi, and uses a special encoding scheme where each transmitter is given an ID. And on the receiving end, it knows that ID, so it knows how to reassemble everything on the receiving end. So everything that was sent is sent all at once. Big garbled mess. And it's up to the receiving end to go A, B, B, C, C, D, But, it's much more complicated than that. And CDMA 2000 1X, also known as 1X RTT, or a lot of times it's just referred to as 1X, is the data mode for CDMA 2000. It used packet switching, which is similar to Ethernet that we're using right now, and used the IP protocol. It had a maximum speed of 153 kilobits with an average speed of around 80 to 100 kilobits. So we're basically looking at about the speed of a bonded ISDN line with 264K channels. The 1X denoted is using a 1.25 megahertz channel, where some of the providers would use up to 3 channels. This was referred to as 3XRTT, and is backwards compatible with CDMA1 IS95 because it used the same 1.2 megahertz bandwidth and the same 800 and 900 megahertz and 1800 and 1900 megahertz bands, and the ability of using a native IP protocol, which is a huge benefit. It wasn't all of the IP spec, but it was enough for it to pass traffic. Now, going back from the last article we did in the N458, the original was like walkie-talkies, and you had to wait until the frequency was free, be able to talk. And to be able to receive a call, you had to wait until the frequency was open. It's much more complicated, and I explain it more in that article, or if you want to listen to 458. And pretty much, as you're going to see, everything was adapted from that. It's pretty much sort of like CDs. The way CDs work is basically they took the principle of how a 33, 78, 45 RPM record, where the records, the vinyl had pits and valleys up and down, the needle would go and vibrate across these different pits and valleys. That's the same thing on the CD. A CD has the laser measures the differences in the height, and that turns it into ones and zeros. So what you're going to see here with the radio technology is they pretty much just re-implemented what they've already created, because a lot of this cellular technology was devised by engineers in the 1940s. They just couldn't use it because obviously they didn't have computers. And they didn't have computers fast enough to do this until the 1970s. So, to get back on topic here, in 1999, Qualcomm developed 1X EVDO, that's EV-DO, revision 0. Now, why the later versions were not letters, were letters and not numbers, I don't know, but you'll see. It stands for 1X Evolution Data Only. It was later changed to Evolution Data Optimized because some people didn't like the distinction of only. Kind of, put them in a corner of what it can do, and they didn't like that distinction. And because it was too many letters, which I agree, a lot of the providers, they dropped the 1X and just called it EVDO, and some of them even just called it EVDO. I mean, It was much faster than the previous 1X data mode, and it was an easy addition for the carriers because it used the existing 1X RTT equipment. EVDO Revision 0 used, like I said, CDMA's 1X RTT and TDM, which is the time division multiplexing that was used in AMPS in the first cellular network. It would be considered 1G. That was in the previous 458 article in the podcast. TDM utilized TDMA technology to send and receive signals on the same channel. Each channel had a time slot similar to how TDMA functioned, and the average speed was about 1.8 megabits per second. And to get people caught up to what the time division multiplexing is, they had multiple time slots, and each phone that got registered into the tower got a time slot, and it basically just went round robin. Your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn. And it pretty much went around that constantly to service all of the phones. And excuse me, I do have some sinus issues because Ohio weather is lovely. And TDMA was pretty much sort of like a MIMO, an early MIMO of that era, where you would have multiple, transmitters all doing this at the same time, and you could get more details reading 458 or listening to it. In 2006, EVDO Revision A, which technically should be Revision 1, but I'm not going to argue, was released. It had a peak rate of about 3.1 megabits on the downlink and 1.8 megabits on the uplink. So the upload and download is still not equal, just like our cable modems crumble. And of course, real world results are going to be much lower than that. QoS was a much needed improvement. It allowed for latency sensitive IP traffic, which would include voice over IP, video telephony, which is video streaming, and video music streaming. Video telephony, I guess, would be not really streaming. It'd be more like Skype or a Discord video call.
It's telephony.
Yeah, telephony? Okay. I've only spoken English for 51 years, so you have to bear with me. Or maybe not 51 years. I'm not sure when I learned how to speak. But anyways. In late 2006, early 2007, EVDO released Revision B. It was much faster with rates up to 4.9 megabits. Some providers opted to bond multiple channels together for a peak rate of 14.7 megabits. This was, like I said, reinvention of the wheel. It was similar to a technique that they used with the 3X RTT. This was referred to as multi-carrier EVDO. And multi-carrier not as like a cell carrier, or it was more of the carrier, which is a frequency. A carrier is basically the center of an RF transmission, and what is being transmitted is wrapped around that carrier signal. And when we talk about bandwidth, it's how far wide those go out. So the 1 1/4 was 1.25 megahertz, was only very small, and eventually we're going to get up to like 20, which you can think of it as like a highway, a 1-lane highway versus a 20-lane highway. So, moving along here. And that increase that I discussed about bonding multiple, carriers together was largely dependent on the provider too, because they might not have the RF spectrum. Because one of the complications they had is the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and they controlled how much radio interference there is, and because radio waves just go out and keep going and until they dissipate. And if you have too many of the same close enough frequencies, you're going to have interference. It's pretty much like listening to 2 or 3 people speak at the same time. And it pretty much is, is the same type of garbled, unintelligible nonsense as, the spoken word. Now, EVDO Revision C was released in 2006. It was a standard in 2007 called EVDV, Evolution, Data, and Voice. It had a proposed data rate of 280 megabits. And again, you're probably only going to get about 14 point something megabits, per second, which was really good considering that the Revision B needed to bond multiple channels together to achieve that, and they're doing that in one, so that's a good increase. The difference, as they say, the game changer with C over B was you could have voice and data on the same channel, which was revolutionary. As before that, if you're on a phone call, you couldn't have data, and if you're using the internet and somebody called, you lost your internet. So between 2006 and 2007, ultra-mobile broadband was released, but it wasn't used by many carriers, and there's reasons I'll get into later. It was meant to be a replacement for CDMA 2000 and the EVDO specification. It used technologies from WCDMA, such as TDM, time division multiplexing, LS, OFDM, which is least squared orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, and OFDM, which is orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, and then the other one is OFDMA, which is orthogonal frequency division multiple access. And if you really want to bust out the pain pills, look up the Wikipedia page on orthogonal frequency division multiplex. Yeah, that will give you a headache. And there's a whole math around the orthogonal thing because of how they have to pair frequencies together that are not compatible with one another, so you don't get interference. Yeah, that's why I'm not getting into it in here. They both divide frequencies into sub-frequencies like they were doing before with the 1x RTT. But the best way I could think of it for us nerds is you can think of it like a VM host that is running multiple VMs. So you have one tower, you can think of that as the VM host, and then each VM is a cell phone. So that's about the simplest way I can explain it. I'm not sure if that's the best analogy, but that's the one I could think of, because you could put up multiple VMs in a VM host doing all different things. And then, so in any case. And that's the reason why I haven't explained this in detail, is because of the complexity of everything. And I'll get in less technical detail as we go along into the LTE and 4G and 5G stuff. Now, despite the improvements offered by Revision C and the ultra-mobile broadband, Qualcomm ended development of EVDV in November of 2008 in favor of adopting LTE, which we'll get to later. Multiple factors contributed to this. The two most common was the update fatigue from the providers. They were losing interest in these marginal upgrades because they were very expensive and they weren't really getting anything out of it. Although Rev C of EVDV was quite an improvement over revision B. So I'm going to take a breath here and see if anyone has any comments or questions. So I can drink here.
Nothing so far. I mean, some of it sounds familiar. A lot of it I didn't know.
Yeah, it's a lot
I
of
could
stuff.
probably get into a discussion.
Yeah, we left a
The
lot
only-
of this behind.
The only question I was going to ask is CDMA isn't as widely used outside the States. Most of us are on GSM. Is that just an accident of history, or is that something you're going to get into, or is there something more fundamental to the technology?
It was that's a very good question, Midget. It's more of, I don't want to say learning from the mistakes of others, but it's more of a better implementation of the technology. Where we'll get into this when we cross the pond and talk about the UTMS, which is the 3G equivalent in the UK and in Europe. And yes, it's not. It was common when you had the first generation phones, the amps and the digital amps. They used the TDMA, but they found out that it wasn't really great for data because with the current technology, because data needs a stream. It doesn't like being broken up. Where the circuit switch data of the phone was a constant stream of audio, and telephone providers didn't want to use that for the data because the critical part of the phone was making phone calls, not data. So, but that's a very, very good question there. So let me see where I left off here. Okay. Okay, I think I mentioned that they ended the development in November of 2008 in favor of LTE, which I'll get to later. I think I did that about the update fatigue, and it's expensive to upgrade stuff, and they weren't really getting a return on their investment. So in 2010, there was an update to 1X, and they called it 1X Advanced. And providers could have 4 times the capacity on their voice calls in the same bandwidth, which freed up the ability to have more data available for EVDO. Unfortunately, this required phones to use 1X Advanced, sort of like the cart before the horse type of thing. But it was backwards compatible with 1X, so it wasn't like they upgraded and they left other people stranded. It was still something that could fall back to the original 1X technology. Now, SVDO, simultaneous voice and EVDO, was an implementation of EVDV by Verizon and Sprint. It was used by phones using that supported standard. This was released in 2011, but it was short-lived, as you'll see later when I discuss the LTE and etc. Once it, technology, jumping the shark, So, SVDO was only used when a phone would roam into a 3G area. Then it would fall back to the circuit switched for the phone calls and such. And the LTE would allow for the calls and data to happen at the same time. Now, there are many factors that hindered further revisions of CDMA 2000 and EVDO. AMPS, first generation, CDMA 1, second generation, CDMA 2000, third generation, 3G. The voice calls were circuit switched, meaning that they, like I said, they had a dedicated connection to the tower. And it was used, as soon as you turned your phone on and it registered itself with the tower, it was occupying that bandwidth, regardless of you using it whatsoever. It's just waiting for you to make a call. It's waiting for you to receive a call. So that was lost bandwidth for the tower. And like, for example, IMTS, which was the original phone system that went back to the 1940s, and preceded AMPS was the 1970s into the 80s, only used the channel when they needed to make a call and receive a call. So there was nothing tied up on the tower unless a lot of people were talking. If you've ever heard the recording, all circuits are busy now. Please try your call again later. That meant that the tower wasn't accepting any new connections from the phones. So if you turned your phone on, you wouldn't get any service. EVDO used the packet switching, like I said, which is similar to Ethernet. And it also used the IP technologies, not the entire IP stack, but enough to pass some traffic. Here are some other factors. The providers needed to implement the new technology, obviously. The issue was that the technology was being released faster than they could install it. The only saving grace was it was all backwards compatibility, at least as far as CDMA 2000 was concerned. And so much, and to the same degree, UMTS. It was pretty much like they're going across the country and like, okay, we got half the country in this standard. And Qualcomm and these other companies are like, hey, we released a new standard. And the carriers will go, darn. Because they only had half the country rolled out. And now they've got a new standard. So that's why they were getting kind of upset with these innovations. And the problem was with us, too, is we held on to phones because they were expensive. And you'd buy this phone. Huh?
Right? I mean,
yeah.
Back in the day, you could hold on to a phone for a lot longer than you could mostly these days. I mean, they were bricks, first of all. And second, the technology wasn't advancing as quickly as it is now.
No. And a lot of the stuff that that the providers used to do, maybe still do in your country, wherever you're listening to this from, is because some of the technology even would fall back. The problem is, in some instances, it was all or nothing. So the carriers, and I reason why I put providers in here because I didn't want people to confuse with carriers as in RF carriers. So I've been trying to use provider as a replacement for cell carriers. But anyways, they if you have a whole bunch of phones that were compatible with one standard and they were using 1/4 the bandwidth, and then a person turns on their 5-year-old phone, half of that tower's bandwidth is now gone because that phone is now using that old technology. And I'm exaggerating half the bandwidth, but it's pretty much not as efficient because that phone is now using something that is less efficient.
Yeah, a lot of your older phones had to actually eventually be blocked, like those big bricks had to be blocked because people were using them because you could get signal on them from a lot further away because of how powerful the antennas were in those giant things. So they were blocked because they were using up so much bandwidth. And, well, yeah, it was really too bad because you really could use them in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and the thing is, the companies want you to believe there's no more TG. That's a lie, is what Joe just said. Because the FCC is involved in this too, they wouldn't let it die. Now, they said that you can't offer service on a 2G plan, quote unquote. But a phone will still fall back to, not so much. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but pretty much up until this point, you could still fall back to 2G and call in the middle of BFE. And kids, look that up in the Urban Dictionary, because we don't want to say that on this podcast. So, yeah. The other issue is people complained about early termination fees. They complained about these 2-year plans and stuff. And you want to know the reason for that? Well, the providers are like, we need to get these people off these old phones. So, what are we going to do there, Bob? I got an idea. How about we make them cheaper and entice these people to replace them? So that's what they did. They subsidized the phones at their cost. So instead of telling the person that they just bought this $500 phone and a year later, hey, why don't you buy another $500 phone because this one's better? Trust us, it's better. So that's what they did. And if you ever thought about these early termination fees and the 2-year contracts and everything, well, if you canceled, in some cases, if you read the fine print, you're basically repaying the cost of that phone. So the the provider wasn't out the money. So if you left that provider, you ended up paying the full price for the phone. You just didn't realize it. You were just paying the ETF to get away. Now, a good example of this was, like I previously mentioned here in my rambling, was 1X Advanced. The provider could only benefit from this if everyone used a 1X Advanced phone. And the whole backwards compatibility of 1X was both a blessing and a curse to these providers, because implementing things was much less expensive because of re-implementing the wheel, but it was also because somebody could come in with an 18th century wagon wheel and they were required to have service, so to speak. Now, I do want to make a quick mention about T-Mobile and AT&T, because a lot of people in the States wondered, why are they using a European system in the middle of America? Well, T-Mobile is German, a telecommunications company by Deutsche Telekom AG. They entered the U.S. a few years after the CDMA 2000 technology was rolled out. They brought the UMTS service from Europe, and I'll talk about this here in a couple minutes, from the European market in the UK. AT&T's history is way too complicated to mention, and I urge you to read about it, because it's basically like a dog chasing its tail or a snake eating its tail. It makes you wonder why they were broken up in '84 to begin with. But in any case, they also used UMTS, and in the US they used 1700, 1900, and 2100 megahertz. And
Can
I
just quickly interrupt there? So
Sure.
T-Mobile, I've always wondered something about T-Mobile, which is that in this country, we used to have T-Mobile as well. And then T-Mobile merged with other European companies and became something else. I'm trying to remember what it became. I think it became what is now called the O2 network. Now, I always wondered how come T-Mobile still survived in the States. I'm assuming it's just something to do with the way that companies and mergers and acquisitions work rather than anything technical. I don't know if you're going to get to that as well, but I thought I'd make a comment.
Yeah, not so much, because it was going to be a long innards to begin with. So I originally wanted to put a brief history of AT&T, because it was kind of fascinating of how they evolved, but I deleted it out of here. But
well, if any of our viewers or listeners know, I want to pique this British man's curiosity as to why there's still a T-Mobile in the States, you know how to contact us, and I'll let Dale get back to talking about his innards and stop interrupting
Yes.
like a heckler.
T-Mobile's in the
Yes.
States because they're the cheapest freaking cell phone provider.
Yeah, and this ungrateful colonist would like to know as well. But yeah, it's a lot of factors, like Joe said, which I deleted out of my copy before I pasted it into the show notes here. There was a lot of reasons why T-Mobile was so popular in the United States. Was economical, and because there's a statistic that American basically only drives 30 minutes from their home on a day-to-day basis, and as long as T-Mobile covered a 30-mile area of a big city, they didn't have a problem of people losing service. The only problem was when these people would go to vacation in Florida, to go to Disneyland, or Disney World rather, and T-Mobile wasn't there, they didn't have any service. So there was a little bit of a problem too why some people didn't like AT&T and T-Mobile, because historically, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, ask a truck driver, we know, they were terrible down in that area because of reasons. Now, so we're going to go back across the pond, and I'll go through this so we don't take too much more time here, because we were trying in an attempt to make this podcast a little shorter. In 2002, UMTS, which is the Universal Mobile Telecommunications System, it was the 3G replacement for GSM. It used WCDMA, which is a wideband code-division multiple access. And this gets to Majid's point of TDMA and why it was so popular in the UK and in Europe, and not so much in the United States. Implementation. They used two 5 megahertz wide channels compared to the 1.25 megahertz channels that CDMA 2000 and CDMA 1 used. So like I said in my analogy before, you're looking at a 1-lane highway that's going one way in each direction, and two 5-lane highways. That's the difference. So lose my place here. Okay, could I get ahead of myself here from one of my what I wrote here, because I've read this so many times. Because the fact that obviously I read it, or I wrote it. So another addition was multimedia messaging service, or MMS, and that was enabling you to send files like pictures and documents through your mobile using text messaging. And it also was, if you were a chatty Cathy and used more than 160 characters, it would convert that message into an MMS message. And in later iterations, you could do up to 6 MMS messages. So if you wanted to write a Charles Dickens novel in a text message, you could. And the other thing that they carried over from GSM was the subscriber identity module, which is SIM. Now, UMTS used the following bands in Europe: 1885 to 2025 for mobile to tower, and 2110 to 2200 megahertz for tower to mobile, which is a kind of a difference between CDMA 1 and CDMA 2000 is of time shifting frequencies, not, a different, like I said, different implementation. Some countries use 850 to 900 or the 1900 band. Now, to go through these a little bit quicker, 3GPP for their data implementation was HSPA, which is High Speed Packet Access, and it was in 2005. It was the similar to EVDO for CDMA. And HSPA used two protocols. One for their uplink and one for their downlink. So one was downlink packet access, and the other one was uplink packet access with the HD HS prepended to it. And The UMTS called it UTRA TDD, which was UMTS Terrestrial Radio Access Time Division Duplexing, which is the TDD that Majid was mentioning. UTRA encompasses different channel access methods, and that offered a 2 point whatever megabit bandwidth in real world, like 384. But it was still 3 times faster than what we had in the States using 1XRTT. And it was considered 3.5G. And then we got 3 3/4 G, which was HSPA+, which was Evolved High-Speed Packet Access, and it was released in 2008. It had the conceivable rate of 337 megabits, and again, these are lab test numbers. And it was still 3 to 4 times faster than EVDV in the States, at up to 56 megabits. So yeah, 56 is not 337, but it's still not bad. And keep in mind, you can have simultaneous voice and data at the same time. And 3GPP announced LTE finally, a long-term evolution, in December of 2008, and it was actively used in 2009 by Telia Sonera in Oslo and Stockholm, Sweden. And I'm sure they probably don't pronounce that in their language, but that's how an American is pronouncing it. It made it to North America in September of 2010, and like I said, it was considered in 3.95G. And it's a transitional technology towards 4G, and it was based on UMTS and the HSPA standard. They use category numbers to define the capabilities. They also use MIMO, which is the multiple input, multiple output. They also use multiple antennas to increase the amount of data that they could send. And the categories were sequential in number, but it doesn't mean bigger number, better performance. It was just basically as they invented them, that's the next sequential number, and that's what they gave it. And it didn't have anything to do with, what the previous one did. It was more based on what that category could do for the hardware. For example, you wouldn't want to use a category that uses 4x4 MIMO when the device only has 2 antennas. Wouldn't work. Now, LTE, like I said, is the migration past the UMTS. It is a packet switch network and doesn't use a circuit switch network, which was a problem for the providers because the whole point of a phone is to make phone calls. Which, Captain Obvious. But it also was for sending messages, too. It wasn't just for the phone calls. And I'll discuss what they came up with for that. After we mention the LTE Category 4, which is next. Another problem is that many providers couldn't support the requirements of 4G, which is another reason why LTE was the migration path. The ITU-R initially enforced the requirements and wouldn't let anyone use 4G unless they supported all of it. And, well, the long story short, they relented and said, yeah, as long as you refer to it as 4G LTE, yeah, you can use the 4G name, which I think was a terrible misstep because it really made things confusing because the carriers say, oh, yeah, we have 4G. And you find out, no, they did. They had the LTE implementation of 4G. And like I said, I think that was just a terrible idea because of the compatibility issues. And I'm not going to read through these for the sake of time, but I have a list of all the bands and frequencies used in LTE for North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe, which also includes Asia, Africa, and Oceania, which is the countries around Australia. And this distribution of frequencies and that was pretty much why we have what we call world phones, because they found out that a person goes from Africa and goes to, like, if they live in like South Africa and they want to go visit their mates up in England, they can't use their phone. So that's prompted the idea of international phones, which had all the radios and bands in the phones, which, more expensive. So the manufacturers were happy about that because they could charge more money, for a phone. LTE category 4, and I'm only going to mention a couple of these just for reference, had a peak data rate of 150 megabits down and 50 megabits up, and a 5 millisecond latency. It supported 1.4 megahertz to 20 megahertz channels, and it supported the previous duplexing of the frequencies that were used in CDMA and TDMA. And because the ICs were faster, computer were faster, so they were able to re-implement these technologies because the computer could switch transmitters off and on faster and made using data on TDMA usable, which was previously not usable before. The other benefits were you could go 220 miles per hour or 500 kilometers per hour in your car and still have mobile data. And that depends on where you're at, on the frequency band your phone was using. They had higher density of the cell phone towers, which allowed for femto and picocell technology. It was still backwards compatible with GSM. So you roam into another area, you still could use your phone. And here's the solution for making phone calls, which is the whole point of having the phone. VoLTE, Voice over LTE, which allowed you to make calls over the data instead of the traditional circuit switched system. So basically, you were doing voice over IP. And of course, this required LTE technology at every tower. So other providers would need to continue using the 3G for voice and messaging in case a person roamed outside of an LTE area. And it would do what they call circuit switched fallback, CSFB. Simultaneous voice in LTE, SVLTE, was another option, which was similar to the 3G SVDO, where the phone was specifically designed to support both systems. And that was by way of having two transmitters, duplicate, for both systems. And that worked great, except it had really bad battery life because if you're using both of them at the same time, you're using more battery. If you're not using them both at the same time, you really didn't see a difference. And then we progressed into LTE Advanced, known as LTE Plus, LTE-A, or 4G Plus. It was first used by SK Telecom in South Korea in 2013. And by 2019, it was used in 134 countries. The most notable improvement was the carrier aggregation and the 4x4 MIMO. Carrier aggregation basically was another form of bonding. It basically, you could bond multiple bands. So basically, it's like Inception. You're bonding multiple bands of multiple frequencies on multiple streams on multiple frequencies. So the rabbit hole gets deep on this technology. So that was a big benefit, was the carrier aggregation. Because, like I said, combining the multiple frequencies on the multiple bands meant faster data. And the 4x4 MIMO technology, like I said, is used in Wi-Fi, but on a much larger scale. Cat 6 and Cat 12 were part of the LTE Advanced standard. 6 was rolled out between 2011 and 2013 and had a peak of 300 megabits and a peak upload of 51. 12 was rolled out in 2015 and it was capable of 603 and a download of 102, and it is our current max on 4G LTE. Unless, like you said, do carrier aggregation and bond channels. And this carrier aggregation is a very popular feature, like on my Peplink that I have in my truck. It can support 2 SIMs or 2 eSIMs at the same time. I'm not utilizing that, but it's a nice feature to have because that costs money. And I'm paying enough for what I have right now. And I'm going to do a very brief mention because I know Joe had some interest in WiMAX. So I'm just going to include this for completeness sake. WiMAX was a IEEE standard 802.16e, and it was mostly for fixed devices that didn't move in 2005. And despite being more advanced and ahead of LTE, the providers didn't pick up on it. They thought that the money grab was going to be in mobile data and what LTE and 4G was promising. WiMAX is still in use, though, like I said, it's more for fixed devices. Sprint was one of the few providers that used it in mobile in 2008, and it was branded as 4G, even though it didn't support 4G. And the ITU and the FCC didn't like them doing that because, it's kind of misleading. You're pulling the wool over the sheep's eyes there. But they stopped using it in 2015. And it wasn't a bad technology, it's just bad timing with the LTE advancements that they had in Europe through 3GPP2. 3GPP. Now, 3GPP released 4G in 2012, and it was announced about the same time as LTE was. And due to the previous mentioned reasons, it took longer to adopt by the mobile providers. 3GPP had the following requirements for 4G. An all packet switch network, basically all IP, no circuit switched. Have a peak data rate of 100 megabits for mobile and 1 gigabit for stationary for that. Dynamically share the resources to support more users per cell. Like I previously mentioned, the providers wanted to have as many people on a tower as possible because they didn't like getting phone calls from people saying that they have no service or that they have no data service. The channel bandwidth requirements was between 5 to 20 and was later 40, up to 40 through improvements. And handovers. They wanted smooth handovers. They didn't want people having drop calls because drop calls means angry tech support calls. So you can see LTE and 4G have more in common than they don't have in common. And now we're getting towards the end here. 5G. And I skipped over a lot of stuff, so if you really want to read more into the details of what I'm skipping over, it'll be in the show notes. 5G was created in 2015. The initial details were available in 2017. Now, I have no idea how you would pronounce this in Arabic. I'm not sure if Majid could help here, but I know that's Khada. But I don't know how you would pronounce Ooredoo in Arabic. And I'm not sure if that's even an Americanization of the actual Arabic word.
Yeah, I mean,
But that's
Qatar is easily enough. It's just a more deeper queue.
it's
Uh,
it's
uh,
the
uh,
yeah, I read
it's a
about
gut
that. It's
rocket.
more yeah.
Yeah. Ore do. I mean, I suppose I'll have to figure out. It can't be do. It can't be a hard D because there's no hard D. So it'd have to
Yeah.
be Urdu. Ah, Urdu. Okay, Urdu means what what do you want?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it's like, oh, not what do you want, but like, this is what I want. So that's probably how it is. Yeah. Okay. All
It's
right. That works. All right.
I honestly, as you know, in my experience with Mr. Hoppers, I try to pronounce things correctly to be
Yeah.
polite and to be not the quote unquote stupid American. And the so they have the distinction of having the first 5G system, and it was called 5G NR, which is 5G new radio, which meant new equipment. Throw out the old stuff, bring in the new stuff, even though there was some backwards compatibility for 4G.
So, by the way, it's Uridu. That's how it's pronounced, and it means, as I was almost right. It means I want.
Okay, cool. I tried reading that this afternoon, and my wasn't working to be able to pronounce it because I understood what they were saying, but some of that I tried figuring it out on my own. But I figured I would ask you live on here.
Yeah, nice to know I'm useful for something.
Yeah, but they implemented this in May of 2018. The main difference from 4G is the capability of peak speeds around 10 gigabits with a lower latency. And the unified, like I said, the unified standard is actually called 5G New Radio or 5G NR. And like it's backwards compatible with the OFDM because I'm not saying that sentence again, but it's using the OFDM that 4G was using. And so that people can make phone calls, because what's a mobile without making phone calls? Their implementation of VoLTE was called, or is called, Voice over NR, or VoNR. So you can make phone calls on your 5G mobile. And the 5G NR uses two bands in two frequency ranges. These ranges extend into what is called millimeter wave or wave. Frequency range 1 FR1 is 410 to 7125 megahertz. And frequency range 2 is FR2 24,250 megahertz to 71 megahertz, which is basically 2.25 gigahertz to 71 gigahertz. FR1 is primarily used for mobile phones, and FR2 is primarily used for stationary. Although the millimeter wave portion of FR1 up towards the 7 gigahertz can be used for both mobile and stationary. Though you would have to be in a very close proximity to be able to do that on mobile, which I'll get to here in a second. 5G can use additional radios depending on what they're after, what their intended use for is. Millimeter wave is mostly used in microwave transmissions. It's those ones, if you ever seen a tower which looks like it's a circular like flat dish, that's a microwave tower. It basically, look, if you ever had like room service at a hotel and they bring all your plates in and they have it covered with this big cover over your plates. If you pick that up and looked at it, that's what a microwave tower would look like. Now, the mobile service was a more confined area than the typical 4G tower. They had low band, mid band, high band. So low band is similar to the 4G tower coverage using the 600 and 900 megahertz band. Mid-band uses microwaves at 1.7 to 4.7 gigahertz, which allows up to 900 megabits. And then the high band uses the 24 to 47 gigahertz. Even though they're licensed up to 71 gigahertz, they haven't implemented the technology to use that yet. I think as mobile home internet gets more popular, I'm thinking they'll probably open up more of the spectrum to utilize that. That's just my opinion. Now, where was I here? And this allows for the 24 to 47 gigahertz, allows for multiple gigabits per second for fixed locations. And the problem with a millimeter wave is it can't go through buildings, trees, or people. It's better suited for fixed location. That's why it's like high up in the air, where it's one tower to one tower, or a tower to that building, type of.
I mean, it's one of these things that it gets you very great numbers from like a tech demo kind of standpoint, but real life, I mean, outside of the States, I don't think many places have got ultra wideband. I don't think we've got it here in the UK.
No.
And even the ones in the US, it's not really that useful, is it?
I have not noticed any increase in performance on these 5G ultra wideband whatsoever over the 4G.
There's only been 2 or 3 places I've been, and I can't remember because, like I said, I drive between 9 and 12,000 miles a month, so I don't really remember where I've been. But there are a few places, and I haven't really tested it lately because my phone's all on Wi-Fi using my Peplink, because Verizon, which I'm using Spectrum, but they're reselling Verizon. And they don't have very good coverage out west and in parts of Texas. So my Peplink uses, AT&T, T-Mobile. No. Yeah, AT&T. Yeah, there's 4. AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, and US Cellular. So I pretty much have service wherever I go. I can always tell when I walk away from my truck when I don't have service. I forget that, I was on Wi-Fi in my truck. Okay, now here are the benefits and disadvantages of 5G for mobile. 5G has a smaller size tower equipment. A typical 4G tower is 100 feet or 30 meters tall, with each panel antenna at about 4 feet or 1 meter in length. A 5G tower can be as small as a backpack or about the size of some luggage, a suitcase. It uses small antennas similar to what you would have on your Wi-Fi router. It can be mounted on utility poles, light poles, traffic lights, ledges, rooftops, anything like that. For comparison, a 4G tower is about 1 to 4 miles or 1.6 to 6.5 kilometers apart from one another. And a 5G tower needs to be 500 to 1,000 feet apart or 152 to 305 meters apart. So as Majid was saying and what Bill was saying, this is why a lot of people are calling 5G a flop, because it's not working unless you're in a concentrated area with the millimeter wave implemented, and that you have a phone that can do millimeter wave, because a lot of people still have 5-year-old phones that are still using old technology. Now,
I don't know. Sorry to interrupt, but I mean, you guys talked about not having luck with 5G. And honestly, when I'm on my phone and I'm out somewhere and it's slow, when I look, I'm connected to 5G. So it's almost like I wish I could disable it on my phone, because either it's the network I'm on or just the connectivity of it being poor, and it'll say the ultra wide or whatever. So it's supposed to be, and it'll be like a full connection, and it's just absolutely dog slow. Whereas if I'm on LTE, it's perfectly fine. So, I mean, it's just really frustrating. And I
Oh.
wish I could just,
You
not
saw a
use
lot
it.
of this. You saw a lot of the same things when things switched from 3G to 4G.
Yeah.
And that's during the time frame where phones were subsidized, so everybody had a 4G phone. And the problem got
Yeah.
to be that the 4G was so saturated that you could get a connection, but you couldn't actually get anything done there, and you wouldn't automatically drop to 3G. But at that time, the nice thing was your phones had the ability to turn off 4G and switch to just 3G, and then your internet connection
Exactly.
would be just fine.
Yes.
They don't have that anymore.
I know. And it's really, I've looked and I keep thinking, am I just missing it? Because I remember being able to do that. And I did do that for a long time, just disabled 4G because it just wasn't worth it. And I'd rather have a slower connection that was more reliable than a supposedly fast connection that barely ever works. So,
right. If you were in a really crowded place or something, it was worth it to drop down to 3G and deal with the slower speeds because you actually had a connection.
The reason why I got away from Verizon and the way that they programmed their phones was I would be down in Hutchins, and that's where one of the 5G towers is for the Dallas area, because I think there's one up closer to Joe's neck of the woods. And the way the phone was programmed is it favored 5G. The problem was I was too far away from that to get service. It was enough to register on the tower, but it wouldn't pass traffic. And on my previous phone, I could disable it and only use 4G. With the new phone that I had, I couldn't disable it. So I would spontaneously have like 4G and be fine, and then it would switch to 5, and I would lose service for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then it would go back to 4G. I got rid of them because of that, and they couldn't understand that. I kept on asking them politely, roll a truck down here and your engineers will be able to find out what I'm talking about. But they I don't know if they ever fixed it, because I'm not in Hutchins much as I used to be, because we used to have a drop yard down there that we no longer have. So I'm not there long enough to utilize it. But to finish up my long article, which I talked fast, and if you're not a native speaker and you're having trouble following along with me, you can do what I do when I listen to my podcast, and I just slow down the the playback so that it's better understandable. Or you can be like Joe and speed up the podcast to 4 or 5 or 10x for the audiobooks and stuff. But to finish off what my presentation is here, with 5G, you can have higher bandwidth in a smaller area. A good example would be a sporting event. You can mount dozens of these towers on the stadium, around the perimeter, and providing that they have the backbone to support this, but they could do up to 10 gig for all the people that are in the stadium Instagramming and TikToking and etc. And so people have service, but like I said, it depends on the phone. If the person has the phone that's able to do that. Now, the downside of 5G is what we already just discussed, is it doesn't have the range of 4G. It is pathetically sad. It's not even a quarter mile, and I don't know what that is in kilometers off the top of my head, but yeah, it's probably a few hundred meters, of range. So it's a technical limitation of the millimeter wave. It's really not something that they can correct. It's just RF theory. it can't go very far by design unless of the implementation is changed. But because of the phone, it's easy to pinpoint a tower to that office building to give them internet. It's another thing to pinpoint a car going 70 miles an hour down the interstate. It's pretty much practically impossible. So, I mean, it wasn't until, like I said in the previous article, it wasn't until 4G came around that you were able to do, a couple 100 miles an hour in a car and still maintain service. So perhaps 6G, whatever they're going to call the next invention, maybe they can correct this. But I hope everyone enjoyed this, both these 458 and this episode, whatever episode we're on now, which 462. Should have looked at the notes. So if anyone has any other questions or comments, we can move along to check this out.
That's you, Majid.
Well, I mean, I can read it if you want. I added it, so it doesn't matter. I don't care.
Oh, he's just read this.
Well, he's talking about the transition.
Oh, yeah.
Majid's on
Come
the
on,
phone.
Majid.
But Majid's a little busy, so
Okay,
let's move
well,
on to check this out.
Well done, Joe. So I found this the other day. I thought it was a pretty cool thing. Recently I'd been using the Android feature Quick Share, which is, I guess, Apple has some equivalent of that that everybody is familiar with except for me because I don't know anything about Apple products. Anyway, so it's a built-in file share protocol to Android that uses a combination of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. So this application Packet is a partial implementation of that quick share protocol, and it lets you send and receive files wirelessly from Android devices or another device using Packet. So I know there's already like a million file transfer apps out there, but I thought this one was cool just simply because it integrates with the inbuilt Android feature. So it makes it more straightforward for people. Maybe they don't want to install an app or, don't have an app already installed or whatever. So this way they can just literally use, that quick share feature. The speed seemed to be very good based on the testing I did. I transferred a large video and a bunch of smaller files, and it all just worked, just the way you'd expect it to. And it's maybe not the most important thing to everybody, but I think the UI is really well done. Very attractive looking app, very clean and simple, just dedicated to the purpose that it's serving. And yeah, so I don't use what is it, KDE Connect? I think that's what it's called, or anything like that, where my phone is like always connected to my computer. So for me, it's handy to just be able to quickly send a file, in either direction if I need to do that. I've done things like, not texting it, but, using like a messaging app, like it's a lazy way to transfer a file. But this is more direct and it seemed to be faster.
Send your wife a message on Facebook and say, ignore that, and then go click on the link.
I do with a Telegram. I have a personal like junk Telegram channel that's just me. So I do that.
Moving files on and off of a phone has been kind of a pain these last few years. So any solution is probably cool.
I use Local Send, which is a pretty simple file transfer app as well. But again, you have to have it installed on the device to be able to use it. And this is just, I thought it was cool that you're just using a feature that's already there. So yeah, that's all. If you want to check it out, there's a link in the show notes, but it's called Packet and it's published as a Flatpak.
I'm definitely going to check this out because I use like an SFTP server or something like that on the phone and connect with it. I mean, it's so arcane But
I mean, you have Nextcloud
Yeah,
set
yeah.
up. Use Nextcloud.
yeah, I could do that. But I mean, that's putting an intermediary in the middle, to connect
I mean,
This is
I
directly.
nice
must.
just for like
I mean, I must say,
for
local send is also something that I use quite a bit.
that's what I was just saying. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was
Yeah,
using that too.
and
But this is nice just because it's already, you don't have to do anything, right? It's already just there. You're just
yeah. So
using
that
quick
was so that was
storage.
that was that was the thing I was going to say, because it's I've been trying to figure out what it means when it says partial implementation of the quick share protocol. Is
So it
that it?
doesn't have like the contacts part of it. So if you look in Android, there are levels of you can have anyone who's a contact can see you
Hmm.
or your other devices. So I don't
Hmm.
think it has that part of it. It's
Okay.
really just the visibility and then the transfer part of it. Like you can't like in Android when you do that, you can save devices. There's lots
Hmm.
of like granular stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas I think this is just more straightforward, passing the file. But yeah, it's a neat little utility. I think it's worth giving it a shot. And
Yeah. No. I mean, I'm checking it out. I'm going to check it out as well. Cool. All right. So I think after check this out, we have vibrations from the ether. So we have an email, I think it was, from Jaden Martin. Hey, mintCast crew, you should look into Tailscale for your VPN needs for connecting network services. Really simplified my setup. No more messing around with WireGuard configs. Love the podcast, but please stay away from politics. Cheers. Okay, bit of a backhanded compliment on that one. Yeah. So Tailscale, I think we've talked about Tailscale quite a few times. I think actually, and its use and things like that. I tried using it. I think it was about 18 months ago when I had that project of turning a Raspberry Pi into an xCloud instance. And so without having to get into port forwarding and stuff like that, that seemed to be a secure way. I know, Bill, you were thinking about Tailscale, but
Well,
then you kind
it's
of know,
just not an
but you kind
option
of,
for me.
I was gonna say, you kind of know your way around WireGuard, though, know the configs anyway, don't you?
Well, the problem for me is if I'm going to serve up these websites to like everybody in the whole world, then neither WireGuard or Tailscale is an option. I've got to be able to have a static IP address and serve this stuff up to the internet, which means I've got to poke 80 and 443 holes into my firewall. But for people that are just like, if you want to run a Jellyfin server and you're just going to serve it to yourself, or you want to have a Nextcloud and you're just going to serve it to yourself, WireGuard is an absolute no-brainer because
or being away and wanting to do a remote desktop connection and not wanting to have like an open port or hopping through a third party.
Right.
It's nice to have that direct connection. Yeah, no, Tailscale is a revelation. I mean, if you've never at least tried it, it's incredibly easy to use, and its performance is extremely good. There's almost no overhead, both from a network perspective and like using system resources. And it's just so simple. Like you connect to your sort of mesh, setup, and whatever devices are in your segment or whatever, like they're just there. And that's what's beautiful for, like Bill's saying, for, if you have a file server or a media server or a remote desktop, or like it's just like you're literally on a LAN connection. So it's beautiful.
Look, it took me forever to switch away from OpenVPN to WireGuard. It's simply because once I find something that works, I tend to stick with it. So it's and it hasn't been said that long since I switched to WireGuard. Probably like 2-3 years at this point. So it's probably going to be a while before anybody convinces me that I should switch to Tailscale, considering how much faster
WireGuard
and better
is a no-brainer.
WireGuard works
over
OpenVPN. So it's
I
going
was
to be
going to add.
tough. Go ahead.
There was the second thing I was going to add in the check this out, which is called WireGuard Easy. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's web server or web-based control panel for
I
setting
used
up WireGuard. Yeah.
WireGuard dashboard.
Oh
Okay.
gosh,
Which
you
does
got
the
all
same
kinds
thing.
of scripts out there like PyVPN. That's another good one that
Well,
will set up.
I installed the WireGuard dashboard on my Proxmox, so I can spin up a new WireGuard instance instantly and get a QR code that I can take a picture of and use that QR code to connect using the WireGuard app on my phone.
Right, you can do that with the PyVPN too.
Yeah.
The only thing is if you're using just flat WireGuard as opposed to something like Tailscale, is you've got to poke the WireGuard port into the firewall, which big deal to me, but I know a lot of people do have reservations against opening ports and stuff like that. The thing is,
you
though,
randomize the port number.
Even if you just use the WireGuard port, if no traffic is going to get past, well, it's not going to go anywhere unless it's got the key to get into WireGuard. It's going to go nowhere. It's just going to get stopped right there.
I think was it Jason Donefeld, I think is the gentleman that created WireGuard, if I'm not mistaken. I'm old, so I have false memories. But the way the protocol was written was genius.
It's simple.
The way
Simplicity.
that like Bill said, it's so simplistic but so complicated, because part of the protocol negotiation, with not to get into the weeds of how TCP connections work, but part of that negotiation is the key. And if the sending end client, you want to call it, is trying to get in and doesn't present that key, it closes the connection. There's no handshake. It's pretty much like we were talking about, the 1940s, the mafia stuff, earlier. It's sort of like the secret knock before they even talk to you. It's like knock, 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 type of thing. Where the WireGuard, if it doesn't see that I think they call it a noise. It's some type of part of the encryption. If it doesn't see that, it's like la 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 la.
Well, because there's ways of DDoSing a server by like flooding it with SSH requests. If you don't have that set up right. With WireGuard, you can't even get past that protocol in order
exactly.
Yeah.
You can't DDoS it because it's ignoring anything until it goes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know.
That's
I know
a
what
good
that
word.
key is.
Ignoring. It just ignores everything that does not have the key to get past the WireGuard protocol. So there's nothing to do any damage whatsoever.
Yeah, on Tailscale, the benefit is more of the overlay networking stuff that Tailscale does. And pretty much the long story short on that is you have to know that you need that. I'm using it more because it's just a single pane of glass. And I know we can do what Bill does and just manage the keys manually in the terminal. But what's nice about the interface with the Tailscale is it's a simple. I know people have reservations against curl, but it's basically you take this curl, put it in the terminal, press enter, it downloads everything, it prompts you, and
well, don't even use curl if you don't want to. Download the script, and
you don't have to. You could actually look at the script and look, because you could. Good thing, Bill. Here's a pro tip. Just do what I do. I see a curl script, download it. Don't execute it.
Yeah.
Right click, save as. Then you can look at what curl is doing.
Right.
And if curl is downloading a script, download the script yourself. You can do wget. You can use curl itself and download the script.
And that's pretty much
don't
true
execute it.
of most of the scripts where you go and the first instructions are go ahead and curl this script and pipe it into bash as root
Yeah,
and
pipe to bash.
and most people are going to do it that way. Then you got this other group of people that, well, hold on, well, no, just download it. Then you can go through it as slow as you want and then just execute that script, and that works. The thing about Tailscale, it's not just handling the VPN layer, but it's handling the IP layer as well, because you've got this concept where if you're trying to access a server remotely, you're either going to need that server to have a static IP address, or there needs to be some kind of dynamic IP layer involved. And with something like Tailscale, you don't need that, because that Tailscale is something on the server side it's letting the internet know that, hey, it's not a static IP address, but if you, this is all anecdotal. This is where I'm at, So I can't see that being a good solution for like hundreds and hundreds of people connecting to it, but I could be wrong, But it is a no-brainer if it's a service that you can get for free, especially. It's a no-brainer for people that are trying to connect to it when it's just your server back home, for things like Nextcloud or Jellyfin or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I think most of it is for team management, because that's something I'm getting into with my friend, who we're going to be each other's cloud, where he's going to make a ZFS pool of his data and encrypt it, and I'm going to put it in my server and import it as a pool, and I'm going to create a VM with Proxmox and attach that VM to that, to that pool, so that he can access it through Tailscale, and he's going to do the same thing at his home. And where the benefit of Tailscale is versus rolling your own keys like what Bill is doing, which is nothing wrong with what he's doing. It's just the implementation difference, where I can go into, I just learned this a couple weeks ago. You can go into the Tailscale and set that user can only access its own clients. So if I put in there me, I can only access the ones that I manage. He comes in and does the command to attach his computer, his VM, to his Tailscale account. Then he can only see his, and I can only see mine. Now, how this would work, and like what Bill was saying with a larger deployment, it would take time to do this, but what they could do is set up groups, pretty much like in Discord, where you have people that are assigned roles. And then you can just say, okay, DevOps, only these lists of 20 people have DevOps rights and can access these 4 development servers. And then you can have web dev. So the web team can only access these servers. So that way the DevOps people can't get into the other servers, and the other people can get in the other servers, and it's all behind it's all behind the Tailscale. And the way it works is the state table on your router. Anything that has a connection going outside to the internet, it remembers and will let back in. So when my computers boot up and connect to Tailscale, that's an outbound connection to them. So it lets everything back in through the encryption and everything. So that is how you can get away with not opening up the the WireGuard port on your router, is because you're already making an outbound connection to Tailscale. And the other last thing I'll say is they don't hold the user accounts. You have to use your own auth. You can use Google, you can use Microsoft, you can use Intra, you can use whatever your company's using, like your own AD, Active Directory. You could use your own. And what Tailscale says is, we don't want your user accounts because they can be hacked. We want you to use your own system using the 2FA and encryption keys like the FIDO keys and the YubiKeys and stuff. So yeah, like I said, if you just want to do a simple thing, you could probably just roll your own, like what Bill is doing. But if you really want to nerd out on some of this stuff, it's free. 100 clients, 3 users.
Yeah, I just need I need mintcast.org to resolve to the container that's running our website. I need nextcloud.mintcast.org to resolve to our Nextcloud. You know, I need things to work the way the normal internet does, you know, and so these kind of solutions are not really an option for me. But that is kind of cool the way you get granular. Like it sounds like what you're saying is there's like profile based options involved that give you the ability to control who gets access to what with something like.
Yeah, and it's not by default. You have to do it yourself because by default, everything's unconfigured. There's nothing. It's pretty much like a firewall. Unless you put the rules in, there's nothing there.
Right on. Take her away, Majid.
Coolio. So, the last piece of feedback is in our show notes. You can read. It's basically from Stan Richard. So if anybody's trying to help out any Windows 10 users in October, there is a PDF version of a book which is called Bye Bye Windows 10. There's some links in the show notes. It's written by members of the Atlanta Linux enthusiasts, and you can get it as a paperback or Kindle, etc. And it introduces Mint, yay, as a good choice. Cool. All right then. Well, thank you for listening to this episode. Can I
say something about that real quick?
Yeah.
It's funny you bring that up because today I've had to build a Windows machine for the Three Fat Truckers podcast because we need to start live streaming on TikTok, and in order to do that, you need a Windows machine in order to install the TikTok Live Studio, which does not work on Linux whatsoever. And it turns out the cool motherboard I had to build this machine with does not support Windows 11. I'm not telling anybody to do this, but what I did was to use Ventoy and put a Windows 11 ISO on a Ventoy and used that to install Windows 11 on a motherboard that does not actually support Windows 11. Now, the reason I'm not telling people to do that is theoretically...
Because we're mintCast and we're a Linux podcast. That's why we're not telling you to do it.
But, I mean, if you find yourself in the situation, and you will find yourself in situations where there is just not a Linux analog to what you need to do, there is an option to use, and by default, Ventoy will boot a Windows 11 ISO and skip over the process of requiring the TPM and the secure boot as well as a Windows account. So if you install this on a machine and you leave the internet access off, so in other words, you leave the Ethernet wire unplugged and you don't sign into any Wi-Fi, you can install this on a machine without requiring a Windows account, and you can put Windows 11 on a machine that would otherwise stop you from doing that. I'm not telling people to do that because theoretically...
No, you're not telling people to do it, but you've explained exactly for how to do it, Bill.
Well, because you keep interrupting me.
You shot yourself in the foot there.
The reason I say that we're not telling you to do that is because theoretically, if you install Windows that way, at some point during a Windows upgrade, the whole thing could just get undone for you. And you would have to just either theoretically start from scratch, or it just would cease to work. That has not happened to me yet. That is, like I said, a theoretical situation, but that is an option.
See, at the last OTC, you were having a go at me for saying something nice about Windows. Yeah?
I'm not
And
saying
now
anything
here
nice.
you are-
In
and
fact,
here
I'm
you
saying...
are telling people how to put it on. Oh, should we just rename this Windows Cast then?
I was
Flip it.
backed into a corner here. First off,
You-
understand that I tried
How are you back
everything
into
else.
a corner?
I was backed into a corner. I tried. Okay, so first of all, I tried to.
Okay, you know what?
I tried to
there is
implement-
There's nothing you can say that
Let
will
me
get you out
say
of this hole.
I tried to implement the TikTok thing through a browser, and yeah, you can access TikTok through a browser. You cannot access.
You having fun digging that hole? Do you want me to give you a hand?
You cannot go live through the browser. So the next step was to try to use a Windows 11, a virtual machine.
Miss,
That
I
didn't
didn't
work.
really use Windows 11. I didn't really use Windows 11.
I pray you never find yourself in a situation where you've got to stream to TikTok live like we do, because TikTok for normal people, and I do a podcast that is teeming with normal people. Normal.
Are you calling us weird?
We are
That's
weird.
messed up, bro.
Yes, compared
As I
to
said,
the.
how is that hole getting along? That you're
Imagine
digging?
you're me. You're a weird person on a normal person show, and you're trying to make.
No, I'm
normal
absolutely fully normal.
Wait.
Yeah, are you?
Are you saying truck drivers are normal?
I'm trying to say most of them are normal, and then there's guys like me and Dale, and I don't think I need
At
it.
this
Where are
rate,
you at?
Be coming out in
Where's
Australia.
that backing me
One
up?
of them.
You're digging.
Not a single one of them.
Okay,
You're
so
just weird in a different way.
okay,
Anyway, before Bill, gets completely, off his rocker, we better get on to.
so
some
yeah, if you need
housekeeping
Windows 11,
announcements.
install it with a Ventoy.
I tell people that too. Don't feel bad. It's just Majid talking smack over there.
Right on.
That is my role in life. To talk smack.
I got these Asus
Housekeeping and
motherboards
announcements.
for $100 a piece, and they're nice motherboards, but they don't support Windows 11. So
No, your job is to put people to sleep, and you're just really good at it.
I know. Bill will be good at it as well at this rate.
go ahead there, Majid.
Oh, sorry, I am hosting, am I? All right, am I allowed to continue with my hosting?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
not
thank
just
you very
your
much.
job
We'll
to
see.
interrupt; it's your
We'll
job
see.
to host too.
Oh, is it? Okay. Thank you for listening to this episode of mintCast. If you see something we should be talking about, tell us. Send us an email, mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post at the mintcast subreddit. Chat with us on Discord and Telegram. And we're going to stop the posting directly on mintcast.org because we take too long to check. Our next episode, next full episode, will be on Sunday, June the 22nd, 2025. And there's a link to get that converted to your time zone in the show notes. Our next roundtable, stroke mintcast extra, stroke what we're going to call it, we're not exactly sure. Hey ho, will be Saturday, June 14th, 2025. And the one after that will be on Saturday, June 28th, 2025. And there's links to get that all converted to your time zones in the show notes, as well as live stream information. So it's time to wrap up. Mr. Boylan.
Well, I am on a couple of other podcasts. I'm on the Linux Link Tech Show, which is at tllts.org. I'm on Linux Lugcast with Eric, linuxlugcast.com. You can send me an email directly, jb@mintcast.org, or you can buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. I do really appreciate it when that happens. And link in the show notes for that one.
Yeah, so Moss.
Can't
be with us today. But you can get him on Full Circle Weekly News, Moss at bodylinux.com. He's on Mastodon at Zyvela at hostux.social, and occasionally he's on Hacker Public Radio. Bill.
Yeah, I'm. You can email me. I'm bill@medcast.org. I'm
Bill at Microsoft.org. Sorry.
Oh, that is cold, man. Bill@midcast.org is my email. Bill_H on Discord. I'm so ashamed. At WCHauser3 at Fossadon.org on Mastodon. Also check out Linux OTC, and Three Fat Truckers. I'm on Linux OTC with Eric and Majid. Go ahead, Majid.
So you can get me on drmajid.mintcast.org. You can get me on
At
Mastodon.
iOS fan at Apple.
Good looking
at
out.
atypical_doctor at mastodon.social. Atypical Doctor on Instagram, Threads. I have the Atypical Doctor podcast at atypicaldoctor.com. And I'm also on Linux OTC with William here. Go on, Eric.
I make it easy. You can just email me at eric@mintcast.org.
Eric's had enough.
And Dale?
Well, I can be reached as Dale_CDL on Telegram and Discord. And my email is Dale_CDL@pm.me. And I found out Proton on the free account can receive pm.me messages, but when you send the email out, if you don't have a paid account, it shows up as protonmail.com. So you can still email me at Dale_CDL@pm.me, and you can.
It's funny how they didn't make that clear
me.
when they said you can now use both email addresses.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I was setting up my Fastmail for my 3 domains. Or actually, I got 4 now because of what you sent me for distro hoppers. But anyways, when I was testing it, I was emailing myself from my Proton to my new Fastmail accounts for my different domains. And it came as that, but I sent it to @pm.me out of habit. But anyways, I'm starting Distro Hoppers Digest back up after its almost a year.
So you say.
Year hiatus. It's just going to be me solo. I am, like we're doing with mintCast, I'm reinventing it. It's still going to be distro reviews.
It's going to be Dale, but it's going to be Distro Hoppers, but it's going to be only him solo on OF.
So it's Dale does distros.
Yeah,
well, you know what, Dale, I wouldn't mind being on there a time or two if you don't mind. I've got a couple that I don't mind talking about.
Well, Arch.
Yeah, you just
what?
Yeah, you took. Yeah, Bill took the words right out of my mouth because one of my plans that I was going to do, and I've been discussing with some other friends, is having guest hosts, and maybe not for the entire episode, but stitching it in, after the fact, because I was going to have some people that are more familiar with certain distros to talk, because I know I wanted to have Bill on there because Arch has been really unrepresented in distro hoppers, and thus it's Manjaro or.
In which universe is Arch underrepresented?
In which universe?
It's a joke to you people, isn't it, Arch?
Yes.
You people.
Did you see
Bill?
The disgust?
William.
The disgust.
We should wrap this up, gosh sake.
Right, we're getting punchy now.
Yeah, before we leave, we want to make sure we acknowledge some people who make mintCast possible. Bill for shilling for Microsoft. I mean, audio editing and for hosting the server.
It's fine.
Our website. Archive.org for our audio files. Upstar for our logo. InitID for the Discord logo. Londoner for our time syncs and various multiple thousands of contributions. And of course, the Linux Mount development team for the fine distro we love to talk about.
Thanks, Clem.
And Co.
And wrap.
That was good, man.
It was a good show.
That was fun.
It was. It was none the shorter, that's for sure.
Well, and there's you thinking that doing 3 what you call news articles wouldn't be enough, yeah?
Let me be honest.
Yeah.
The time was one thing, but I think just the mundane droning on was probably the biggest thing.
Oh, yeah.
We enjoyed this. I enjoyed it a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
I'll say that.
Yeah, I think it was 2 hours of more engagement than like what Bill was just saying, droning on about.
Yeah.
Listening to an audiobook.
Yeah.
I still miss the bi-weekly wanderings already.
It's not going anywhere. It's just moving to.
It's
another
not going
day.
anywhere, man. We're going to be doing it next Saturday.
Do we have
Keep
notes
it.
set up for that? Because I have my
We got to
own
figure that
notes.
one out. Thanks to everybody
I
in
think it'll
live
be